Chapter 17. A few days before the end-of-year testing cycle began, Ellen Dougherty summoned me to her office. After she closed the door, she said, "I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused, George, but if I had it to do over again, I'm not sure I would behave any differently." I said nothing. I was no longer angry, but I was still stunned. I'd gotten very little sleep since the blow-up, and I had an idea that 4 a.m. and I were going to be close friends in the near future. "Clause 25 of the Texas School Administrative Code," she said, as if that explained everything. "I beg your pardon, Ellie?" "Nina Wallingford was the one who brought it to my attention." Nina was the district nurse. She put tens of thousands of miles on her Ford Ranch wagon each school year, circling Denholm County's 8 schools, 3 of them still of the 1- or 2-room variety. Clause 25 concerns the state's rules for immunization in schools. It covers teachers as well as students, and Nina pointed out she didn't have any immunization records for you. No medical records of any kind, in fact. And there it was, the fake teacher exposed by his lack of a polio shot. Well, at least it wasn't my advanced knowledge of the Rolling Stones or inappropriate use of disco slang. "You being so busy with the jamboree and all, I thought I'd write to the schools where you taught and save you the trouble. What I got back from Florida was a letter stating that they don't require immunization records from substitutes. What I got from Maine and Wisconsin was never heard of him." She leaned forward behind her desk, looking at me. I couldn't meet her gaze for long. What I saw in her face before I redirected my gaze to the backs of my hands was an unbearable sympathy. Would the State Board of Education care that we had hired an impostor? Very much. They might even institute legal action to recoup their year's salary. Do I care? Absolutely not. Your work at DCHS has been exemplary. What you and Sadie did for Bobby Jill Allnut was absolutely wonderful. The kind of thing that garners State Teacher of the Year nominations. "Thanks," I muttered. "I guess." I asked myself what Mimi Corcoran would do. What Meme said to me was if he had signed a contract to teach next year and the year after, you'd be forced to act. But since he's leaving in a month, it's actually in your interest and the school's to say nothing. Then she added, "But there's one person who has to know he's not who he says he is." Ellie paused. "I told Sadie that I was sure you'd have some reasonable explanation, but it seems you do not." I glanced at my watch. "If you're not firing me, Miss Ellie, I ought to get back to my Period 5 class. We're diagramming sentences. I'm thinking of trying them on a compound that goes, 'I am blameless in this matter, but I cannot say why.' What do you think? Too tough?" "Too tough for me, certainly," she said pleasantly. "One thing," I said. "Sadie's marriage was difficult. Her husband was strange in ways I don't want to go into. His name is John Clayton. I think he might be dangerous. You need to ask Sadie if she has a picture of him so you'll know what he looks like if he shows up and starts asking questions. And you think this because I've seen something like it before. Will that do? I suppose it will have to, won't it?" That wasn't a good enough answer. "Will you ask her?" "Yes, George." She might mean it, she might only be humoring me. I couldn't tell. I was at the door when she said, as if only passing the time of day, "You're breaking that young woman's heart." "I know," I said, and left. Mercedes Street, late May. "Welder, are you?" I was standing on the porch of 2706 with the landlord, a fine American named Mr. J. Baker. He was stocky, with a huge gut he called the house that Shiner built. We had just finished a quick tour of the premises, which Baker had explained to me was prime to the bus stop, as if that made up for the sagging ceilings, water-stained walls, cracked toilet tank, and general air of decrepitude. "Night watchman," I said. "Yeah, that's a good job. Plenty of time to fuck the dog on a job like that." This seemed to require no response. "No wife or kiddies?" "Divorced, they're back east." "Pay alimony, do you?" I shrugged. He let it go. "So, do you want the place, Amberson?" "I guess so," I said and sighed. He took a long rent book with a floppy leather cover out of his back pocket. "First month, last month, damage deposit." "Damage deposit? You have to be kidding." Baker went on as if he hadn't heard me. "Rent's due on the last Friday of the month. Come up short or late, and you're on the street, courtesy of Fort Worth PD. Me and them get along real good." He took the charred cigar stub from his breast pocket, stuck the chewed end in his gob, and popped a wooden match alight with his thumbnail. It was hot on the porch. I had an idea it was going to be a long, hot summer. I sighed again. Then, with a show of reluctance, I took out my wallet and began to remove $20 bills. "In God we trust," I said. "All others pay cash." He laughed, puffing out clouds of acrid blue smoke as he did so. "That's good. I'll remember that. Especially on the last Friday of the month." I couldn't believe I was going to live in this desperate shack and on this desperate street after my nice house south of here, where I'd taken pride in keeping an actual lawn mowed. Although I hadn't even left Jody yet, I felt a wave of homesickness. "Give me a receipt, please," I said. That much I got for free. It was the last day of school. The classrooms and hallways were empty. The overhead fans paddled air that was already hot, although it was only the 8th of June. The Oswald family had left Russia. In another 5 days, according to Al Templeton's notes, the SS Mazdam would dock in Hoboken, where they would walk down the gangplank and onto United States soil. The teacher's room was empty except for Danny Laverty. "Hey, champ, understand you're going off to Dallas to finish that book of yours." "That's the plan." Fort Worth was actually the plan, at least to begin with. I began cleaning out my pigeonhole, which was stuffed with end-of-school communiques. "If I was footloose and fancy-free instead of tied down to a wife, 3 rugrats, and a mortgage, I might try a book myself," Danny said. "I was in the war, you know." I knew. Everyone knew, usually within 10 minutes of meeting him. "Got enough to live on?" "I'll be okay." I had more than enough to take me through to next April, when I expected to conclude my business with Lee Oswald. I wouldn't need to make any more expeditions to Faith Financial on Greenville Avenue. Going there even once had been incredibly stupid. If I wanted, I could try to tell myself that what had happened to my place in Florida had just been the result of a prank gone bad, but I'd also tried to tell myself that Sadie and I were doing fine, and look how that had turned out. I tossed the wad of paperwork from my pigeonhole into the trash and saw a small sealed envelope I had somehow missed. I knew who used envelopes like that. There was no salutation on the sheet of notepaper inside, and no signature except for the faint, perhaps even illusory scent of her perfume. The message was brief. "Thank you for showing me how good things can be. Please don't say goodbye." I held it for a minute, thinking, then stuck it in my back pocket and walked rapidly down to the library. I don't know what I planned to do or what I meant to tell her, but none of it mattered because the library was dark and the chairs were up on the tables. I tried the knob anyway, but the door was locked. The only two cars left at the faculty end of the parking lot were Danny Laverty's Plymouth sedan and my Ford. The ragtop now looked rather raggedy. I could sympathize. I felt a bit raggedy myself. "Mr. A! Wait up, Mr. A!" It was Mike and Bobby Jill hurrying across the hot parking lot toward me. Mike was carrying a small wrapped present, which he held out to me. "Bobby and me got you something." Bobby and I, and you shouldn't have, Mike. "We had to, man." I was moved to see that Bobby Jill was crying, and pleased to see that the thick coating of Max Factor had disappeared from her face. Now that she knew the disfiguring scar's days were numbered, she had stopped trying to conceal it. She kissed me on the cheek. "Thank you so much, Mr. Amberson. I'll never forget you." She looked at Mike. "We'll never forget you." And they probably wouldn't. That was a good thing. It didn't make up for the locked and dark library, but yes, it was a very good thing. "Open it," Mike said. "We hope you like it. It's for your book." I opened the package. Inside was a wooden box about 8 inches long and 2 inches wide. Inside the box, cradled in silk, was a Waterman fountain pen with the initials G.A. engraved on the clip. "Oh, Mike," I said, "this is too much." "It wouldn't be enough if it was solid gold," he said. "You changed my life." He looked at Bobby. "Both our lives." "Mike," I said, "it was my pleasure." He hugged me, and in 1962 that is not a cheap gesture between men. I was glad to hug him back. "You stay in touch," Bobby Jill said. "Dallas ain't far." She paused. "Isn't." "I will," I said, but I wouldn't, and they probably wouldn't either. They were going off into their lives, and if they were lucky, their lives would shine. They started away, then Bobby turned back. "It's a shame you two broke up. It makes me feel real bad." "It makes me feel bad, too," I said. "But it's probably for the best." I headed home to pack up my typewriter and my other belongings, which I reckoned were still few enough to fit into no more than a suitcase and a few cardboard boxes. At the one stoplight on Main Street, I opened the little box and looked at the pen. It was a beautiful thing, and I was very touched that they had given it to me. I was even more touched that they had waited to say goodbye. The light turned green. I snapped the lid of the box closed and drove on. There was a lump in my throat, but my eyes were dry. Living on Mercedes Street was not an uplifting experience. Days weren't so bad. They resounded with the shouts of children recently released from school, all dressed in too big hand-me-downs, housewives kvetching at mailboxes or backyard clotheslines, teenagers driving rusty beaters with glass-packed mufflers and radios blaring K-Life. The hours between 2 and 6 a.m. weren't so bad either. Then a kind of stunned silence fell over the street as colicky babies finally slept in their cribs or dresser drawers, and their daddies snored toward another day of hourly wages in the shops, factories, or outlying farms. Between 4 and 6 in the afternoon, however, the street was a jangle of mamas screaming at kids to get the hell in and do their chores, and papas arriving home to scream at their wives, probably because they had no one else to scream at. Many of the wives gave back as good as they got. The drunkadaddies started to roll in around 8, and things really got noisy around 11, when either the bars closed or the money ran out. Then I heard slamming doors, breaking glass, and screams of pain as some loaded drunkadaddy tuned up on the wife, the kiddies, or both. Often red lights would strobe in through my drawn curtains as the cops arrived. A couple of times there were gunshots, maybe fired at the sky, maybe not. And one early morning, when I went out to get the paper, I saw a woman with dried blood crusting the lower half of her face. She was sitting on the curb in front of a house 4 down from mine, drinking a can of Lone Star. I almost went down to check on her, even though I knew how unwise it would be to get involved with the life of this low-bottom working neighborhood. Then she saw me looking at her and hoisted her middle finger. I went back inside. There was no welcome wagon, and no women named Muffy or Buffy trotting off to junior league meetings. What there was on Mercedes Street was plenty of time to think. Time to miss my friends and Jody. Time to miss the work that had kept my mind off what I'd come here to do. Time to realize that teaching had done a lot more than pass the time. It had satisfied my mind the way work does when you care about it, when you feel like you might actually be making a difference. There was even time to feel bad about my formerly spiffy convertible. Besides the non-functional radio and the wheezy valves, it now blatted and backfired through a rusty tailpipe, and there was a crack in the windshield caused by a rock that had bounced off the back of a lumbering asphalt truck. I'd stopped washing it, and now, sad to say, it fit in perfectly with the other busted-up transpo on Mercedes Street. Mostly, there was time to think about Sadie. "You're breaking that young woman's heart," Ellie Doherty had said, and mine wasn't doing so well either. The idea of spilling everything to Sadie came to me one night as I lay awake listening to a drunken argument next door. "You did." "I didn't." "You did." "I didn't." "Fuck you." I rejected the idea, but it came back the following night, rejuvenated. I could see myself sitting with her at her kitchen table, drinking coffee in the strong afternoon sunlight that slanted through the window over the sink, speaking calmly, telling her my real name was Jacob Epping. I wouldn't actually be born for another 14 years. I had come from the year 2011 via a fissure in time that my late friend Al Templeton called the rabbit hole. How would I convince her of such a thing? By telling her that a certain American defector who had changed his mind about Russia was shortly going to move in across the street from where I now lived, along with his Russian wife and their baby girl, by telling her that the Dallas Texans, not yet the Cowboys, not yet America's team, were going to beat the Houston Oilers 20-17 this fall in double overtime? Ridiculous. But what else did I know about the immediate future? Not much, because I'd had no time to study up. I knew a fair amount about Oswald, but that was all. She'd think I was crazy. I could sing her lyrics from another dozen pop songs that hadn't been recorded yet, and she'd still think I was crazy. She'd accuse me of making them up myself. Wasn't I a writer, after all? And suppose she did believe it. Did I want to drag her into the shark's mouth with me? Wasn't it bad enough that she'd be coming back to Jody in August, and that if John Clayton was an echo of Frank Dunning, he might come looking for her? "All right, get out then!" a woman screamed from the street, and a car accelerated away in the direction of Winscott Road. A wedge of light probed briefly through a crack in my drawn curtains and flashed across the ceiling. "Cocksucker!" she yelled after it, to which a male voice, a little more distant, yelled back, "You can suck mine, lady. Maybe it'll calm you down." That was life on Mercedes Street in the summer of '62. Leave her out of it. That was the voice of reason. It's just too dangerous. Maybe at some point she can be part of your life again. A life in Jody even, but not now. Only there was never going to be a life for me in Jody. Given what Ellen now knew about my past, teaching at the high school was a fool's dream. And what else was I going to do? Pour concrete? One morning I put on the coffee pot and went for the paper on the stoop. When I opened the front door, I saw that both of the Sunliner's rear tires were flat. Some bored out-too-late kid had slashed them with a knife. That was also life on Mercedes Street in the summer of '62. On Thursday, the 14th of June, I dressed in jeans, a blue work shirt, and an old leather vest I'd picked up at a second-hand store on Camp Bowie Road. Then I spent the morning pacing through my house. I had no television, but I listened to the radio. According to the news, President Kennedy was planning a state trip to Mexico later in the month. The weather report called for fair skies and warm temperatures. The DJ yammered a while, then played Palisades Park. The screams and roller coaster sound effects on the record clawed at my head. At last I could stand it no longer. I was going to be early. But I didn't care. I got into the Sunliner, which now sported 2 retread black walls to go with the white walls on the front, and drove the 40-odd miles to Love Field in northwest Dallas. There was no short-term or long-term parking, just parking. It cost 75 cents a day. I clapped my old summer straw on my head and trudged approximately half a mile to the terminal building. A couple of Dallas cops stood at the curb drinking coffee, but there were no security guards inside and no metal detectors to walk through. Passengers simply showed their tickets to a guy standing by the door, then walked across the hot tarmac to planes belonging to one of 5 carriers: American, Delta, TWA, Frontier, and Texas Airways. I checked the chalkboard mounted on the wall behind the Delta counter. It said that Flight 194 was on time. When I asked the clerk to make sure, she smiled and told me it had just left Atlanta. "But you're awfully early." "I can't help it," I said. "I'll probably be early to my own funeral." She laughed and wished me a nice day. I bought a time and walked across to the restaurant where I ordered the Cloud 9 chef salad. It was huge, and I was too nervous to be hungry. It's not every day that a man gets to see the person who's going to change world history. But it gave me something to pick at while I waited for the plane carrying the Oswald family to arrive. I was in a booth with a good view of the main terminal. It wasn't very crowded, and a young woman in a dark blue traveling suit caught my eye. Her hair was twisted into a neat bun. She had a suitcase in each hand. A Negro porter approached her. She shook her head, smiling, then banged her arm on the side of the traveler's aid booth as she passed it. She dropped one of her suitcases, rubbed her elbow, then picked up the case again and forged onward. Sadie, leaving to start her 6-week residency in Reno. Was I surprised? Not at all. It was that convergence thing again. I'd grown used to it. Was I almost overwhelmed by an impulse to run out of the restaurant and catch up to her before it was too late? Of course I was. For a moment it seemed more than possible. It seemed necessary. I'd tell her fate, rather than some weird time travel harmonic, had brought us together at the airport. Stuff like that worked in the movies, didn't it? I'd asked her to wait while I bought my own ticket to Reno, and tell her that once we were there, I'd explain everything. And after the obligatory 6 weeks, we could buy a drink for the judge who had granted her divorce before he married us. I actually started to get up. As I did, I happened to look at the cover of the Time I'd bought at the newsstand. Jacqueline Kennedy was on the cover. She was smiling, radiant, wearing a sleeveless dress with a V-neck. "The President's Lady dresses for summer," the caption read. As I looked at the photo, the color drained away to black and white, and the expression changed from a happy smile to a vacant stare. Now she was standing next to Lyndon Johnson on Air Force One and no longer wearing the pretty and slightly sexy summer dress. A blood-spattered wool suit had taken its place. I remembered reading, not in Al's notes, somewhere else, that not long after Mrs. Kennedy's husband had been pronounced dead, Lady Bird Johnson had moved to embrace her in the hospital corridor and had seen a glob of the dead president's brains on that suit. A headshot president, and all the dead who would come after standing behind him in a ghostly file that stretched away into infinity. I sat back down again and watched Sadie carry her suitcases toward the Frontier Airlines counter. The bags were obviously heavy, but she carried them con brio, her back straight, her low heels clicking briskly. The clerk checked them and put them on a baggage trolley. He and Sadie conferred. She passed him the ticket she had bought through a travel agency 2 months ago, and the clerk scribbled something on it. She took it back and turned for the gate. I lowered my head to make sure she wouldn't see me. When I looked up again, she was gone. 40 long minutes later, a man, a woman, and 2 small children, a boy and a girl, passed the restaurant. The boy was holding his father's hand and chattering away. The father was looking down at him, nodding and smiling. The father was Robert Oswald. The loudspeakers blared, "Delta's Flight 194 is now arriving from Newark and Atlanta Municipal Airport. Passengers can be met at Gate 4. Delta Flight 194 now arriving." Robert's wife, Veda, according to Al's notes, swept the little girl into her arms and hurried along faster. There was no sign of Marguerite. I picked at my salad, chewing without tasting. My heart was beating hard. I could hear the approaching roar of engines and saw the white nose of a DC-8 as it pulled up to the gate. Greeters piled up around the door. A waitress tapped me on the shoulder, and I almost screamed. "Sorry, sir," she said in a Texas accent that was thick enough to cut. "Just wanted to ask if I could get you all anything else." "No," I said, "I'm fine." "Well, that's good." The first passengers began cutting across the terminal. They were all men wearing suits and prosperous haircuts, of course. The first passengers to deplane were always from first class. "Sure I can't get you a piece of peach pie? It's fresh today." "No, thanks." "You sure, hon?" Now the coach class passengers came in a flood, all of them festooned with carry-on bags. I heard a woman squeal. Was that Veda greeting her brother-in-law? "I'm sure," I said, and picked up my magazine. She took the hint. I sat stirring the remains of my salad into an orange soup of French dressing and watched. Here came a man and woman with a baby, but the kid was almost a toddler, too old to be June. The passengers passed the restaurant, chattering with the friends and relatives who had come to pick them up. I saw a young man in an army uniform pat his girlfriend's bottom. She laughed, slapped his hand, and stood on tiptoe to kiss him. For 5 minutes or so, the terminal was almost full. Then the crowd began to thin out. There was no sign of the Oswalds. A wild certainty came to me. They weren't on the plane. I hadn't just traveled back in time. I had bounced into some sort of parallel universe. Maybe the yellow card man had been meant to stop something like that from happening, but the yellow card man was dead. And I was off the hook. No Oswald? Fine. No mission. Kennedy was going to die in some other version of America, but not in this one. I could catch up with Sadie and live happily ever after. The thought had no more than crossed my mind when I saw my target for the first time. Robert and Lee were side by side, talking animatedly. Lee was swinging what was either an oversized attaché case or a small satchel. Robert had a pink suitcase with rounded corners that looked like something out of Barbie's closet. Veda and Marina came along behind. Veda had taken one of the 2 patchwork cloth bags. Marina had the other slung over her shoulder. she was also carrying June, now 4 months old, in her arms, and laboring to keep up. Robert and Veda's 2 kids flanked her, looking at her with open curiosity. Veda called to the men, and they stopped almost in front of the restaurant. Robert grinned and took Marina's carry bag. Lee's expression was amused, knowing, maybe both. The tiniest suggestion of a smile dimpled the corners of his mouth. His nondescript hair was neatly combed. He was, in fact, the perfect A.J. squared away in his pressed white shirt, khakis, and shined shoes. He didn't look like a man who had just completed a journey halfway around the world. There wasn't a wrinkle on him, and not a trace of beard shadow on his cheeks. He was just 22 years old, and looked younger, like one of the teenagers in my last American Lit class. So did Marina, who wouldn't be old enough to buy a legal drink for another month. She was exhausted, bewildered, and staring at everything. She was also beautiful, with clouds of dark hair and upturned, somehow rueful, blue eyes. June's arms and legs were swaddled in cloth diapers. Even her neck was wrapped in something, and although she wasn't crying, her face was red and sweaty. Lee took the baby. Marina smiled her gratitude, and when her lips parted, I saw that one of her teeth was missing. The others were discolored, one of them almost black. The contrast with her creamy skin and gorgeous eyes was jarring. Oswald leaned close to her and said something that wiped the smile off her face. She looked up at him warily. He said something else, poking her shoulder with one finger as he did so. I remembered Al's story and wondered if Oswald was saying the same thing to his wife now. Pucha da sucha. Walk, bitch. But no, it was the swaddling that had upset him. He tore it away, first from the arms, then the legs, and flung the diapers at Marina, who caught them clumsily. Then she looked around to see if they were being watched. Veda came back and touched Lee's arm. He paid no attention to her, just unwrapped the makeshift cotton scarf from around baby June's neck and flung that at Marina. It fell to the terminal floor. She bent and picked it up without speaking. Robert joined them and gave his brother a friendly punch on the shoulder. The terminal had almost entirely cleared out now. The last of the deplaning passengers had passed the Oswald family, and I heard what he said clearly. Give her a break, she just got here. She doesn't even know where here is yet. Look at this kid, Lee said, and raised June for inspection. At that, she finally began to cry. She's got her wrapped up like a damn Egyptian mummy. Because that's the way they do it back home. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Staria Baba. Old woman. He turned back to Marina with the bawling baby in his arms. She looked at him fearfully. Staria Baba. She tried to smile the way people do when they know the joke is on them, but not why. I thought fleetingly of Lenny in Of Mice and Men. Then a grin, cocky and a little sideways, lit Oswald's face. It made him almost handsome. He kissed his wife gently, first on one cheek, then the other. USA, he said, and kissed her again. USA, Rena. Land of the free and home of the turds. Her smile became radiant. He began to speak to her in Russian, handing back the baby as he did so. He put his arm around her waist as she soothed June. She was still smiling as they left my field of vision and shifted the baby to her shoulder so she could take his hand. I went home, if I could call Mercedes Street home, and tried to take a nap. I couldn't get under, so I lay there with my hands behind my head listening to the uneasy street noises and speaking with Al Templeton. This was a thing I found myself doing quite often now that I was on my own. For a dead man, he always had a lot to say. I was stupid to come to Fort Worth, I told him. If I try to hook up that bug to the tape recorder, someone's apt to see me. Oswald himself might see me, and that would change everything. He's already paranoid. You said so in your notes. He knew the KGB and MVD were watching him in Minsk, and he's going to be afraid that the FBI and the CIA are watching him here. And the FBI actually will be, at least some of the time. Yes, you'll have to be careful, Al agreed. It won't be easy, but I trust you, buddy. It's why I called you in the first place. I don't even want to get near him. Just seeing him in the airport gave me a Class A case of the willies. I know you don't, but you'll have to. As someone who spent damn near his whole life cooking meals, I can tell you that no omelet was ever made without breaking eggs. And it would be a mistake to overestimate this guy. He's no super criminal. Also, he's going to be distracted mostly by his batshit mother. How good is he going to be at anything for a while, except shouting at his wife and knocking her around when he gets too pissed off for shouting to be enough? I think he cares for her, Al. At least a little. And maybe a lot, in spite of the shouting. Yeah? And it's guys like him who are most likely to fuck up their women. Look at Frank Dunning. You just take care of your business, buddy. And what am I going to get if I do manage to hook up that bug? Tape recordings of arguments? Arguments in Russian? That'll be a big help. You don't need to decode the man's family life. It's George de Mohrenschildt you need to find out about. You have to make sure de Mohrenschildt isn't involved in the attempt on General Walker. Once you accomplish that, the window of uncertainty closes. And look on the bright side. If Oswald catches you spying on him, his future actions might change in a good way. He might not try for Kennedy after all. Do you really believe that? No. Actually, I don't. Neither do I. The past is obdurate. It doesn't want to be changed. He said, Buddy, now you're cooking. With gas. I heard myself muttering. Now I'm cooking with gas. I opened my eyes. I'd fallen asleep after all. Late light was coming in through the drawn curtains. Somewhere, not far away, on Davenport Street in Fort Worth, the Oswald brothers and their wives would be sitting down to dinner, Lee's first meal back on his old stomping grounds. Outside my own little bit of Fort Worth, I could hear a skip-rope chant. It sounded very familiar. I got up, went through my dim living room, furnished with 2 thrift shop easy chairs but nothing else, and twitched back one of the drapes an inch or so. Those drapes had been my very first installation. I wanted to see. I didn't want to be seen. 2703 was still deserted, with the for rent sign double-tacked to the railing of the rickety porch, but the lawn wasn't deserted. There, 2 girls were twirling a jump rope while a third stutter-stepped in and out. Of course, they weren't the girls I'd seen on Cosset Street in Derry. These 3, dressed in patched and faded jeans instead of crisp new shorts, looked runty and underfed. But the chant was the same, only now with Texas accents. Charlie Chaplin went to France just to watch the ladies dance. Salute to the captain, salute to the queen. My old man drives a submarine. The skip-rope girl caught her foot and went tumbling into the crabgrass that served as 2703's front lawn. The other girls piled on top of her, and all 3 of them rolled in the dirt. Then they got to their feet and went pelting away. I watched them go, thinking, I saw them, but they didn't see me. That's something. That's a start. But Al, where's my finish? De Mohrenschildt was the key to the whole deal, the only thing keeping me from killing Oswald as soon as he moved in across the street. George de Mohrenschildt, a petroleum geologist who speculated in oil leases. a man who lived the playboy lifestyle, mostly thanks to his wife's money. Like Marina, he was a Russian exile, but unlike her, from a noble family. He was in fact Baron de Mohrenschildt, the man who was going to become Lee Oswald's only friend during the few months of life Oswald had left. The man who was going to suggest to Oswald that the world would be much better off without a certain racist right-wing ex-general. If de Mohrenschildt turned out to be part of Oswald's attempt to kill Edwin Walker, my situation would be vastly complicated. All the nutty conspiracy theories would then be in play. Al, however, believed all the Russian geologist had done or would do, as I've said, living in the past is confusing, was egg on a man who was already obsessed with fame and mentally unstable. Al had written in his notes, "If Oswald was on his own on the night of April 10th, 1963, chances that there was another gunman involved in the Kennedy assassination 7 months later dropped to almost zero." Below this, in capital letters, he had added his final verdict, "Good enough to take the son of a bitch out." Seeing the little girls who hadn't seen me made me think of that old Jimmy Stewart suspenser, Rear Window. A person could see a lot without ever leaving his own living room, especially if he had the right tools. The next day I went to a sporting goods store and bought a pair of Bausch & Lomb binoculars, reminding myself to be wary of sun flashes on the lenses. Since 2703 was on the east side of Mercedes Street, I thought I'd be safe enough in that regard any time after noon. I poked the glasses through the gap in my drapes, and when I adjusted the focus knob, the crappy living room kitchen across the way became so bright and detailed that I might have been standing in it. The leaning lamp of Pisa was still on the old bureau where the kitchen utensils were stored, waiting for someone to turn it on and activate the bug. But it would do me no good unless it was hooked up to the cunning little Japanese reel-to-reel, which could record up to 12 hours on its slowest speed. I had tried it out, actually speaking into the spare bugged lamp, which made me feel like a character in a Woody Allen comedy. And while the playback was draggy, the words were understandable, all of which meant I was good to go, if I dared to. July 4th on Mercedes Street was busy. Men with the day off watered lawns that were beyond saving. Other than a few afternoon and evening thunderstorms, the weather had been hot and dry. Then plopped down in lawn chairs, listening to baseball games on the radio and drinking beer. Sub-teen posses threw fireworks at stray dogs and the few roving chickens. One of the latter was struck by a cherry bomb and exploded in a mass of blood and feathers. The child who tossed it was dragged screaming into one of the houses farther down the street by a mother wearing nothing but a slip and a Farmall baseball cap. I guessed by her unsteady gait that she had downed a few brewskis herself. The closest thing to fireworks came just after 10 o'clock, when someone, possibly the same kid who slashed my convertible's tires, torched an old Studebaker that had been sitting abandoned in the parking lot of the Montgomery Ward warehouse for the last week or so. Fort Worth FD came to put it out, and everyone turned out to watch. Hail Columbia! The next morning, I walked down to inspect the burned-out hulk, which sat sadly on the puddled remains of its tires. I spotted a telephone booth near one of the warehouse loading bays, and, on impulse, called Ellie Doherty, getting the operator to find the number and connect me. I did it partly because I was lonely and homesick, mostly because I wanted news of Sadie. Ellie answered on the second ring, and she seemed delighted to hear my voice, standing there in an already roasting phone booth with Mercedes Street sleeping off the glorious 4th behind me and the smell of charred car in my nostrils. That made me smile. Sadie's fine. I've had 2 postcards and a letter. She's working at Harrah's as a waitress. She lowered her voice. "I believe as a cocktail waitress, but the school board will never hear that from me." I visualized Sadie's long legs in a short cocktail waitress's skirt. I visualized businessmen trying to see the tops of her stockings or into the valley of her décolletage as she bent to put drinks on a table. "She asked after you," Ellie said, and that made me smile again. "I didn't want to tell her that you'd sailed off the edge of the earth as far as anyone in Jody knew, so I said you were busy with your book and doing fine." I hadn't added a word to The Murder Place in a month or more, and on the 2 occasions when I'd picked up the manuscript and tried to read it, it all seemed to be written in 3rd century Punic. I'm glad that she's doing well. Her residency requirement will be fulfilled by the end of the month, but she's decided to stay out there until the end of summer vacation. She says the tips are very good. Did you ask her for a picture of her soon-to-be ex-husband? Just before she left, she said she has none. She believes her parents have several, but she refused to write them about it. Said they'd never given up on the marriage and it would give them false hope. She also said she believed you were overreacting. Wildly overreacting was the phrase she used. That sounded like my Sadie. Only she wasn't mine anymore. Now she was just, "Hey, waitress, bring us another round, and bend a little lower this time." Every man has a jealous bone, and mine was twanging hard on the morning of July 5th. "George, I have no doubt she still cares for you, and it might not be too late to clear this mess up." I thought of Lee Oswald, who wouldn't make his attempt on General Edwin Walker's life for another 9 months. "It's too early," I said. "I beg pardon?" "Nothing. It's good to talk to you, Miss Ellie, but pretty soon the operator's going to come on the line asking for more money, and I'm all out of quarters. I don't suppose you could get down this way for a burger and a shake, could you? At the diner? If so, I'll invite Dick Simmons to join us. He asks about you almost every day." The thought of going back to Jody and seeing my friends from the high school was probably the only thing that could have cheered me up that morning. "Absolutely. Would this evening be too soon? Say 5 o'clock? "It's perfect. We country mice eat early." "Fine. I'll be there. My treat." "I'll match you for it." Al Stevens had hired a girl I knew from Business English, and I was touched by the way she lit up when she saw who was sitting with Ellie and Deke. "Mr. Amberson, wow, it's great to see you. How are you doing?" "Fine, Dory," I said. "Well, order big. You've lost weight." "It's true," Ellie said. "You need a good taking care of." Deke's Mexican tan was gone, which told me he was spending most of his retirement indoors, and whatever weight I'd lost, he'd found. He shook my hand with a hard grip and told me how good it was to see me. There was no artifice in the man, or in Ellie Doherty for that matter. Leaving this place for Mercedes Street, where they celebrated the 4th by blowing up chickens, began to seem increasingly mad to me, no matter what I knew about the future. I certainly hoped Kennedy was worth it. We ate hamburgers, French fries sizzling with grease, and apple pie a la mode. We talked about who was doing what and had a laugh over Danny Lafferty, who was finally writing his long bruited book. Ellie said that according to Danny's wife, the first chapter was titled, "I Enter the Fray." Toward the end of the meal, as Deke stuffed his pipe with Prince Albert, Ellie lifted a tote she had stored under the table and produced a large book, which she passed above the greasy remains of our meal. "Page 89. And push back from that unsightly puddle of ketchup, if you please. This is strictly on loan, and I want to send it back in the same condition I received it." It was a yearbook called Tiger Tales, and had come from a school a lot more fancy schmancy than DCHS. Tiger Tales was bound in leather instead of cloth, the pages were thick and glossy, and the ad section at the back was easily 100 pages thick. The institution it memorialized, exalted might be a better word, was Longacre Day School in Savannah. I thumbed through the uniformly vanilla senior section and thought there might be a blackface or two there by the year 1990, maybe. "Holy Joe," I said, "Sadie must have taken a pretty good whack in the wallet when she came to Jody from here." "I believe she was very anxious to get away," Deke said quietly, "and I'm sure she had her reasons." I turned to page 89. It was headed Longacre Science Department. There was a corny group shot of 4 teachers in white lab coats holding bubbling beakers, paging Dr. Jekyll, and below it were 4 studio shots. John Clayton didn't look a bit like Lee Oswald, but he had the same sort of pleasantly forgettable face, and his lips were dimpled at the corners by the same suggestion of a smile. Was that the ghost of amusement or barely hidden contempt? Hell, maybe it was just the best the obsessive-compulsive bastard could do when the photographer told him to say cheese. The only distinguishing features were hollows at the temples, which almost matched the dimples at the corners of his mouth. The photo wasn't color, but his eyes were light enough to make me pretty sure they were either blue or gray. I turned the book toward my friends. "See these indents on the sides of his head? Is that just a natural formation like a hooked nose or a chin dimple?" They said, "No," at exactly the same time. It was sort of comical. "They're forceps marks," Deke said, "made when some doc finally got tired of waiting and dragged him out of his mama. They usually go away, but not always. If his hair wasn't thinning on the sides, you wouldn't see him at all, would you?" "And he hasn't been around asking about Sadie?" I asked. "No." They said it in unison again. Ellen added, "No one's been asking after her except for you, George. You damned fool." She smiled, as people do when it's a joke, but not really. I looked at my watch and said, "I've kept you folks long enough. I'll be heading on back." "Want to take a stroll down to the football field before you go?" Deke asked. "Coach Borman said to bring you by if I got a chance. He's got them practicing already, of course." "In the cool of the evening, at least," Ellie said, getting up. "Thank God for small favors. Remember when the Hastings boy got a heat stroke 3 years ago, Deke, and how they thought it was a heart attack at first?" "I can't imagine why he'd want to see me," I said. "I turned one of his prized defensemen to the dark side of the universe." I lowered my voice and whispered hoarsely, "Theater hearts." Deke smiled. "Yeah, but you saved another one from maybe getting red-shirted at Bama. Or at least that's what Borman thinks, because, my son, that's what Jim Ledoux told him." At first I didn't have any idea what he was talking about. Then I remembered the Sadie Hawkins and grinned. All I did was catch 3 of them passing a bottle of rotgut. I threw it over the fence. Deke had stopped smiling. "One of those boys was Vince Knowles. Did you know he was drunk when he rolled that truck of his?" "No." But it didn't surprise me. Cars and booze have always been a popular and sometimes lethal high school cocktail. "Yes, sir." That, combined with whatever you said to those boys at the dance, got Ledoux to swear off drinking. "What did you say?" Ellie asked. She was fumbling her wallet out of her purse, but I was too lost in the memory of that night to argue with her about the check. "Do not fuck up your futures." That was what I'd said. And Jim Ledoux, he of the lazy "I've got the world on a string" smile, had actually taken it to heart. We never know which lives we influence or win or why. Not until the future eats the present, anyway. We know when it's too late. I don't remember, I said. Ellie trotted off to pay the check. I said, "Tell Miss Dougherty to keep an eye out for the man in that picture, Deke. You too. He may not come around. I'm starting to think I could have been wrong about that, but he might. And he's not wrapped too tightly." Deke promised he would. I almost didn't walk over to the football field. Jody was particularly beautiful in the slanting light of that early July evening, and I think part of me wanted to get my ass back to Fort Worth before I lost the will to go there. I wonder how much would have changed if I had skipped that little side trip. Maybe nothing. Maybe a lot. Coach was running a final 2 or 3 plays with the special teams kids while the rest of the players sat on the bench with their helmets off and sweat trickling down their faces. "Red 2! Red 2!" Coach shouted. He saw Deke and me and lifted a spread hand. 5 minutes. Then he turned back to the small and weary squad still on the field. "One more time! Let's see you make that daring leap from no ass to poor ass! What do you say?" I looked across the field and saw a guy in a sport coat, loud enough to scream. He was trotting up and down the sidelines with earphones on his head and what looked like a salad bowl in his hands. His glasses reminded me of someone. At first I couldn't make the connection, then I did. He looked a little like Silent Mike McKeekern, my own personal Mr. Wizard. "Who's that?" I asked Deke. Deke squinted. "Damn if I know." Coach clapped his hands and told his kids to shower up. He walked over to the bleachers and clapped me on the back. "How's it going, Shakespeare?" "Pretty good," I said, smiling gamely. "Shakespeare, kick in the rear. That's what we used to say when we were kids." He laughed heartily. "We used to say, 'Coach, coach, step on a roach.'" Coach Borman looked puzzled. "Really?" "Nah, just goofing with you. And sort of wishing I'd acted on my first impulse and scooted out of town after supper. How does the team look?" "Oh, they're good boys. They're going to try hard, but it won't be the same without Jimmy. Did you see the new billboard out there where 109 splits off from Highway 77? Too used to it to notice, I guess." "We'll have a look on the way out, partner. Booster's done it up right. Jimmy's mom about cried when she saw it. I understand I owe you a vote of thanks for getting that young man to swear off the drinking." He removed his cap with the big C on it, armed sweat from his forehead, put it back on, and sighed heavily. "Probably owe that fucking nummy Vince Knowles a vote of thanks, too, but putting him on my prayer list is the best I can do." I recalled that Coach was a Baptist of the hard-shell variety. In addition to prayer lists, he probably believed all that shit about Noah's sons. "No thanks necessary," I said. "Just doing my job." He looked at me keenly. "You ought to still be doing it, not jerking off over some book. Sorry if that's too blunt, but it's how I feel." That's all right. It was. I liked him better for saying it. In another world, he might even have been right. I pointed across the field where the Silent Mike look-alike was packing his salad bowl into a steel case. His earphones were still hanging around his neck. "Who's that, Coach?" Coach snorted. "Think his name is Hale Duff, or maybe it's Cale. New sports guy at the Big Dam." He was talking about KDAM, Denholm County's one radio station, a teensy sundowner that ran farm reports in the morning, country music in the afternoons, and rock after school let out. The kids enjoyed the station breaks as much as the music. There would be an explosion, followed by an old cowboy type saying, "K-damn, that was a biggin." In the land of ago, this is considered the height of risque wit. "What's that contraption of his, Coach?" Deke asked. "Do you know?" "I know, all right. Coach said, "and if he thinks I'm going to let him use it during a game broadcast, he's out of his sneaker. Think I want everyone who's got a radio hearing me call my boys a bunch of goddamn pussies when they can't deny the rush on 3rd and short?" I turned to him very slowly. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't believe him, so I tried it myself," the coach said. Then, with mounting indignation, "I heard Boof Redford telling one of the freshmen that my balls were bigger than my brains." "Really?" I said. My heartbeat had picked up appreciably. "Duffer there said he built it in his goddamn garage." Coach grumbled. "Said when it's turned up to full gain, you can hear a cat fart on the next block." That's bullshit, of course, but Redford was on the other side of the field when I heard him make his smart remark. The sports guy, who looked all of 24, picked up his steel equipment case and waved with his free hand. Coach waved back, then muttered under his breath, "The game day I let him on my field with that thing will be the day I put a Kennedy sticker on my fucking Dodge." It was almost dark when I got to the intersection of 77 and 109, but a bloated orange moon was rising in the east, and it was good enough to see the billboard. It was Jim Ledoux, smiling with his football helmet in one hand, a pigskin in the other, and a lock of black hair tumbled heroically over his forehead. Above the picture, in star-spangled letters, was "Congratulations to Jim Ledoux, All-State quarterback, 1960 and 1961. Good luck at Alabama. We will never forget you." And below, in red letters that seemed to scream, "Chimla." 2 days later, I walked into Satellite Electronics and waited while my host sold an iPod-sized transistor to a gum-chewing kid. When he was out the door, already pressing the little radio's earpiece into place, Silent Mike turned to me. "Why, it's my old pal Doe! How can I help you today?" Then dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "More bugged lamps?" "Not today," I said. "Tell me, have you ever heard of something called an omnidirectional microphone?" His lips parted over his teeth in a smile. "My friend," he said, "you have once more come to the right place." Chapter 18. I got a phone put in, and the first person I called was Ellen Doherty, who was happy to give me Sadie's Reno address. "I have the telephone number of the rooming house where she's staying, too," Ellen said, "if you want it." Of course I did, but if I had it, I would eventually give in to temptation and call. Something told me that would be a mistake. "Just the address will be fine." I wrote her a letter as soon as I hung up, hating the stilted, artificially chatty tone, but not knowing how to get past it. The goddamn broom was still between us. And what if she met some high-rolling sugar daddy out there and forgot all about me? Wasn't it possible? She'd certainly know how to give him a good time in bed. She'd been a fast learner and was as agile there as she was on the dance floor. That was the jealous bone again. And I finished the letter in a rush, knowing I probably sounded plaintive and not caring. Anything to tear through the artificiality and say something honest. "I miss you, and I'm sorry as hell for the way we left things. I just don't know how to make it better now. I have a job to do, and it won't be done until next spring. Maybe not even then, but I think it will be. I hope it will be. Please don't forget me. I love you, Sadie." I signed it George, which seemed to cancel out any poor honesty I'd managed. Beneath it I added, "just in case you want to call," and my new telephone number. Then I walked down to the Benbrook Library and posted the letter into the big blue mailbox out front. For the time being, it was the best I could do. There were 3 pictures clipped into Al's notebook, printed off various computer sites. One was of George de Mohrenschildt, wearing a banker gray suit with a white hanky in the breast pocket. His hair was combed away from his brow and neatly parted in the accepted executive style of the time. The smile that creased his thickish lips reminded me of Baby Bear's bed, not too hard, not too soft, just right. There was no trace of the authentic crazy, I would soon observe, ripping his shirt open on the porch of 2703 Mercedes Street. Or maybe there was a trace, something in the dark eyes, an arrogance, a touch of the old fuck you. The second picture was of the infamous shooter's nest constructed of book cartons on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The third was of Oswald, dressed in black, holding his mail-order rifle in one hand and a couple of leftist magazines in the other. The revolver he would use to kill Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit during his fucked-up getaway, unless I stopped him, was tucked in Ozzy's belt. This picture would be taken by Marina less than 2 weeks before the attempt on General Walker's life. The location was the enclosed side yard of a 2-apartment building at 214 West Neely Street in Dallas. While I marked time waiting for the Oswalds to move into the shack across the street from mine in Fort Worth, I visited 214 West Neely often. Dallas most assuredly sucked the big one, as my 2011 students were wont to say, but West Neely was in a slightly better neighborhood than Mercedes Street. It stank, of course. In 1962, most of Central Texas smells like a malfunctioning refinery, but the odors of shit and sewage were absent. The street was crumbling but paved, and there were no chickens. A young couple with 3 children currently lived upstairs at 214. After they moved out, the Oswalds would move in. It was the downstairs apartment that concerned me, because when Lee, Marina, and June moved in above, I wanted to be below. In July of '62, the ground floor apartment was occupied by 2 women and a man. The women were fat, slow-moving, and partial to wrinkled, sleeveless dresses. One was in her 60s and walked with a pronounced limp. The other was in her late 30s or early 40s. The facial resemblance pegged them as mother and daughter. The man was skeletal and wheelchair-bound. His hair was a thin white spray. A bag of cloudy pee attached to a fat catheter tube sat in his lap. He smoked constantly, tapping into an ashtray clamped to one of the wheelchair armrests. That summer, I always saw him dressed in the same clothes, red satin basketball shorts that showed his wasted thighs almost to the crotch, a strap-style T-shirt nearly as yellow as the urine in his catheter tube, sneakers held together by duct tape, and a large black cowboy hat with what appeared to be a snakeskin band. On the front of the hat were crossed cavalry swords. Either his wife or his daughter would push him out onto the lawn, where he would sit slumped beneath a tree, still as a statue. I began to lift my hand to him as I cruised slowly by, but he never raised his own in turn, although he came to recognize my car. Maybe he was afraid to return my wave. Maybe he thought he was being evaluated by the angel of death, who made his rounds in Dallas behind the wheel of an aging Ford convertible instead of on a black horse. In a way, I suppose that's what I was. This trio looked like they'd been in residence a while. Were they still going to be in residence next year when I needed the place? I didn't know. Al's notes said nothing about them. For the time being, all I could do was watch and wait. I picked up my new piece of equipment, which Silent Mike had crafted himself. I waited for my telephone to ring. 3 times it did, and I leaped for it each time, hoping. Twice it was Miss Ellie calling to chat. Once it was Deke inviting me to dinner, an invitation I accepted gratefully. Sadie didn't call. On the 3rd of August, a 58 Bel Air sedan pulled into 2703's excuse for a driveway. It was followed by a gleaming Chrysler. The Oswald brothers got out of the Bel Air and stood side by side, not talking. I reached through the drapes long enough to run up my front window, letting in the street noise and a lackluster puff of hot, humid air. Then I ran for the bedroom and brought my new piece of equipment out from under the bed. Silent Mike had cut a hole in the bottom of a Tupperware bowl and taped the omnidirectional mic, which he assured me was top of the line, into it, so it stuck up like a finger. I attached the microphone leads to the connecting points on the back of the tape recorder. There was a plug-in for headphones, which my electronics pal had also claimed were top of the line. I peered out and saw the Oswalds talking to the guy from the Chrysler. He was wearing a Stetson, a rancher's tie, and gaudy stitched boots. Better dressed than my landlord, but of the same tribe. I didn't have to hear the conversation. The man's gestures were textbook. "I know it ain't much, but then you ain't got much, do you, partner?" It had to be a hard scripture for a world traveler like Lee, who believed he was destined for fame, if not necessarily fortune. There was an electrical socket in the baseboard. I plugged in the tape recorder, hoping I wouldn't give myself a shock or blow a fuse. The tape recorder's little red light went on. I donned the earphones and slipped the Tupperware bowl into the gap between the curtains. If they looked over here, they'd be squinting into the sun, and thanks to the shadow cast by the eave above the window, they would see either nothing or an unremarkable white blur that might be anything. I reminded myself to cover the bowl with black friction tape nevertheless. Always safe, never sorry. And in any case, I could hear nothing. Even the street sounds had been muffled. "Oh, yeah, this is great," I thought. "This is just fucking brilliant. Thanks a pantload, Silent Mike." Then I noticed the volume control on the tape recorder was sitting at 0. I twisted it all the way to the plus mark and was blasted by voices. I tore the earphones off my head with a curse, turned the volume knob to the halfway point, and tried again. The result was remarkable, like binoculars for the ears. "$60 a month strikes me as a little bit steep, sir," Lee Oswald was saying. Considering the Templetons had been paying $10 a month less, it struck me that way too. His voice was respectful, tinged by just a trace of Southern accent. "If we could agree on 55. "I can respect a man who wants to dicker, but don't even bother trying," Snakeskin Boots said. He rocked back and forth on his stacked heels like a man who's anxious to be gone. "I gotta get what I gotta get. If I don't get it from you, I'm gonna get it from someone else." Lee and Robert glanced at each other. "I might as well go in and have a look around," Lee said. "This a good place, on a family street," Snakeskin Boots said. "Y'all want to watch out for that first porch step, though. Needs a smidge of carpentering. I got so many of these places and people so hard on them, that last bunch. Low!" "Watch it, asshole," I thought. "That's Ivy's people you're talking about." They went inside. I lost the voices, then got them again, faintly, when Snakeskin Boots ran up the front room window. It was the one Ivy had said the neighbors across the way could see into, and she was 100% correct on that score. Lee asked what his prospective landlord intended to do about the holes in the walls. There was no indignation in the query, no sarcasm, but no subservience either, in spite of the "sir" appended to every sentence. It was a respectful yet flat mode of address he had probably learned in the Marines. Colorless was the best word for him. He had the face and voice of a man who was good at sliding through the cracks, in public at least. It was Marina who saw his other face and heard his other voice. Snakeskin Boots made vague promises and absolutely guaranteed a new mattress for the big bedroom, on account of how that last bunch had gone and stole the one that had been in there. He reiterated that if Lee didn't want the place, someone else would, as if it hadn't been standing vacant all year, then invited the brothers to inspect the bedrooms. I wondered how they would enjoy Rosette's artistic efforts. I lost their voices, then got them again as they toured the kitchen area. I was happy to see them pass the leaning lamp of Pisa without a glance. "Basement?" Robert asked. "No basement," Snakeskin Boots replied, booming it as if the lack of a basement were an advantage. Apparently he thought it was. "Neighborhood like this, all they do is ship water. And the damp, Lord!" Here I lost the vocal track again as he opened the rear door to show them the backyard, which was not a yard at all but an empty field. 5 minutes later they were out front again. This time it was Robert, the elder brother, who tried to dicker. He had no more success than Lee had. "Will you give us a minute?" Robert asked. Snakeskin Boots looked at his clunky, chromed-up watch and allowed as how he could do that. "But I got an appointment over on Church Street, so you fellas need to hurry on and make up your minds." Robert and Lee walked to the rear of Robert's Bel Air, and although they pitched their voices low to keep Snakeskin Boots from hearing, when I tilted the bowl in their direction, I got most of it. Robert was in favor of looking at some more places. Lee said he wanted this one. It would do fine for a start. "Lee, it's a hole," Robert said. "It's throwing your money away, probably." Lee said something I couldn't make out. Robert sighed and raised his hands in surrender. They went back to Snakeskin Boots, who gave Lee's hand a brief pump and praised the wisdom of his choice. He launched into the landlord's scripture, first month, last month, damage deposit. Robert stepped in then, saying there would be no damage deposit until the walls were fixed and the new mattress was installed. "New mattress, sure," Snakeskin Boots said, "and I'll see that step fixed so the little woman don't turn her ankle. But if I fix them walls right off, I'd have to boost the rent by $5 a month." I knew from Al's notes that Lee was going to take the place, and still I expected him to walk away from this outrage. Instead, he took a limp wallet out of his back pocket and removed a thin sheaf of bills. He counted most of them into his new landlord's outstretched hand while Robert walked back to his car, shaking his head in disgust. His eyes turned briefly to my house across the street, then passed on, disinterested. Snakeskin Boots flogged Lee's hand again, then jumped into his Chrysler and drove off fast, leaving a scrunch of dust behind. One of the jump rope girls came barreling up on a rusty scooter. "You moving into Rosette's house, mister?" she asked Robert. "No, he is," Robert said and cocked a thumb at his brother. She pushed her scooter to Lee and asked the man who was going to blow off the right side of Jack Kennedy's head if he had any kids. "I've got a little girl," Lee said. He put his hands on his knees so he could get down to her level. "She purty?" "Not as pretty as you, nor as big." "Can she jump rope?" "Honey, she can't even walk yet." "Well, bull pucky on her." She scooted away in the direction of Winscott Road. The two brothers turned toward the house. This muffled them a little, but when I cranked the volume, I could still make out most of what they were saying. "This pig in a poke," Robert told him. "When Marina sees it, she'll be on you like flies on a dog turd." "I'll Rena," Lee said. "But, brother, if I don't from Ma and out of that little apartment, I'm apt to kill her. She can be but loves you, Lee." Robert walked a few steps toward the street. Lee joined him, and their voices came through clear as a bell. "I know it, but she can't help herself. The other night, when me and Rena's going at it, she hollers at us from the fold-out. She's sleeping in the living room, you know. 'Take it easy on that, you two,' she hollers. 'It's too soon for another one. Wait until you can pay for the one you've got.' I know it. She can be hard. She keeps buying things, brother, says they're for Rena, but shoves them up into my face." Lee laughed and walked back to the Bel Air. This time it was his eyes that skated across 2706, and it took all I had to hold still behind the drapes, and to hold the bowl still, too. Robert joined him. They leaned on the back bumper, two men in clean blue shirts and working men's pants. Lee wore a tie, which he now pulled down. "Listen to this. Ma goes to Leonard Brothers and comes back with all these clothes for Rena. She drags out a pair of shorts that are as long as bloomers, only paisley. 'Look, Rennie, aren't they purty?' she says." Lee's imitation of his mother's accent was savage. "What did Rena say?" Robert was smiling. "She says, 'No, mamushka, no, I thank, but I no like. I like this way.' Then she puts her hand on her leg." Lee put the side of his hand on his own, about halfway up the thigh. Robert's smile widened to a grin. "Bet Ma liked that." "She says, 'Marina, shorts like that are for young girls who parade themselves on the streets looking for boyfriends, not for married women.'" "You're not to tell her where we are, brother. You are not. We get that straight?" Robert didn't say anything for a few seconds. Perhaps he was remembering a cold day in November of 1960. His mama trotting after him along West 7th, calling out, "Stop, Robert, don't walk so fast, I'm not done with you." And although Al's note said nothing on the subject, I doubted if she was done with Lee either. After all, Lee was the son she really cared about, the baby of the family, the one who slept in the same bed with her until he was 11, the one who needed regular checking to see if he'd started getting hair around his balls yet. Those things were in Al's notes. Next to them in the margin were two words you'd not ordinarily expect from a short-order cook: hysterical fixation. "We got it straight, Lee, but this ain't a big town. She'll find you." "I'll send her packing if she does. You can count on that." They got into the Bel Air and drove away. The for rent sign was gone from the porch railing. Lee and Marina's new landlord had taken it with him when he went. I walked to the hardware store, bought a roll of friction tape, and covered the Tupperware bowl with it outside and inside. On the whole, I thought it had been a good day. But I had entered the danger zone, and I knew it. On August 10th, around 5 in the afternoon, the Bel Air reappeared, this time pulling a small wooden trailer. It took Lee and Robert less than 10 minutes to carry all of the Oswald's worldly goods into the new manse, being careful to avoid the loose porch board, which had still not been fixed. During the moving-in process, Marina stood on the crabgrassy lawn with June in her arms, looking at her new home, with an expression of dismay that needed no translation. This time all three of the jump rope girls appeared, two walking, the other pushing her scooter. They demanded to see the baby, and Marina complied with a smile. "What's her name?" one of the girls asked. "June," Marina said. Then they all jumped in. "How old is she? Can she talk? Why don't she laugh? Does she have a dolly?" Marina shook her head. She was still smiling. "Sorry, I no speak." The three girls pelted off, yelling, "I no speak! I no speak!" One of the surviving Mercedes Street chickens flew out of their way, squawking. Marina watched them go, her smile fading. Lee came out on the lawn to join her. He was stripped to the waist, sweating hard. His skin was fish belly white. His arms were thin and slack. He put an arm around her waist, then bent and kissed June. I thought Marina might point at the house and say, "No like. I no like." She had that much English down. But she only handed Lee the baby and climbed to the porch, tottering for a moment on the loose step, then catching her balance. It occurred to me that Sadie probably would have gone sprawling, then limped on a swollen ankle for the next 10 days. It also occurred to me that Marina was as anxious to get away from Marguerite as her husband was. The 10th was a Friday. On Monday, about 2 hours after Lee had left for another day of putting together aluminum screen doors, a mud-colored station wagon pulled up to the curb in front of 2703. Marguerite Oswald was out on the passenger side almost before it stopped rolling. Today the red kerchief had been replaced by a white one, with black polka dots, but the nurse's shoes were the same, and so was the look of dissatisfied pugnacity. She had found them, just as Robert had said she would. Hound of heaven, I thought, hound of heaven. I was looking out through the crack between the drapes, but saw no point in powering up the mic. This was a story that needed no soundtrack. The friend who had driven her, a portly gal, struggled out from behind the wheel and fanned the neck of her dress. The day was already another scorcher, but Marguerite cared nothing for that. She hustled her chauffeur around to the trunk of the station wagon. Inside was a high chair and a bag of groceries. Marguerite took the former. Her friend hoisted the latter. The jump-rope girl with the scooter came riding up, but Marguerite gave her short shrift. I heard, "Scat, child!" and the jump-rope girl rode away with her lower lip pooched out. Marguerite marched up the bald rut that served as a front walk. While she was eyeing the loose step, Marina came out. She was wearing a smock top and the kind of shorts Mrs. Oswald didn't approve of for married women. I wasn't surprised that Marina liked them. She had terrific legs. Her expression was one of startled alarm, and I didn't need my makeshift amplifier to hear her. "No! Mamoshka! Mamoshka, no! Lise, no! Lise, no! Lise!" Then a quick rattle of Russian as Marina expressed what her husband had said in the only way she could. Marguerite Oswald was one of those Americans who believe foreigners are sure to understand you if you just speak slowly and very loudly. "Yes, Lee has his pride," she bugled. She climbed to the porch, deftly avoiding the bad step, and spoke directly into her daughter-in-law's startled face. "Nothing wrong with that, but he can't let my granddaughter pay the price." She was beefy. Marina was willowy. Mamushka steamed inside without a second look. This was followed by a moment of silence, then a longshoreman's bellow. "Where's that little cutie of mine?" Deep in the house, probably in Rosette's old bedroom, June began to wail. The woman who had driven Marguerite gave Marina a tentative smile, then went inside with the bag of groceries. Lee came walking down Mercedes Street from the bus stop at 5:30, banging a black dinner bucket against one thigh. He mounted the steps, forgetting the bad one. It shifted, he tottered, dropped his dinner bucket, then bent to pick it up. "Oh, that'll improve his mood," I thought. He went in. I watched him cross the living room and put his dinner bucket on the kitchen counter. He turned and saw the new high chair. He obviously knew his ma's modus operandi, because next he opened the rusty refrigerator. He was still peering into it when Marina came out of the baby's room. She had a diaper over her shoulder, and the binocs were good enough for me to see there was some spit up on it. She spoke to him smiling, and he turned to her. He had the fair skin that's every easy blusher's bane, and his scowling face was bright red all the way to his thinning hair. He started shouting at her, pointing a finger at the refrigerator. The door still stood open, exhaling vapor. She turned to go back into the baby's room. He caught her by the shoulder, spun her around, and began to shake her. Her head snapped back and forth. I didn't want to watch this, and there was no reason I should. It added nothing to what I needed to know. He was a beater, yes, but she was going to survive him, which was more than John F. Kennedy could say, or Officer Tippit for that matter. So no, I didn't need to see. But sometimes you can't look away. They argued it back and forth, Marina no doubt trying to explain that she didn't know how Marguerite had found them, and that she'd been unable to keep Mamushka out of the house. And of course, Lee finally hit her in the face because he couldn't hit his ma. Even if she'd been there, he wouldn't have been able to raise a fist against her. Marina cried out. He let her go. She spoke to him passionately, her hands held out. He tried to take one of them, and she slapped it away. Then she raised those hands to the ceiling, dropped them, and walked out the front door. Lee started to follow her, then thought better of it. The brothers put 2 ratty old lawn chairs on the porch. Marina sank into one of them. There was a scrape below her left eye, and her cheek was already starting to swell. She stared out into the street and across it. I felt a stab of guilty fear, even though my living room lights were out and I knew she couldn't see me. I was careful to remain still, though, with the binoculars frozen to my face. Lee sat down at the kitchen table and propped his forehead on the heels of his palms. He remained that way for a while, then heard something and went into the smaller of the bedrooms. He came out with June in his arms and began to walk her around the living room, rubbing her back, soothing her. Marina went inside. June saw her and held out her chubby arms. Marina went to them and Lee gave her the baby. Then, before she could walk away, he hugged her. She stood silently inside his arms for a moment, then shifted the baby so she could hug him back with one arm. His mouth was buried in her hair, and I was pretty sure I knew what he was saying, the Russian words for, "I'm sorry." I had no doubt that he was. He would be sorry next time, too, and the time after that. Marina took June back into what had been Rosette's bedroom. Lee stood where he was for a moment, then went to the fridge, took something out, and began to eat it. Late the following day, just as Lee and Marina were sitting down to supper, June lay on the living room floor, kicking her legs on a blanket. Marguerite came puffing down the street from the Winscott Road bus stop. This evening she was wearing blue slacks that were unfortunate, considering the generous spread of her butt. She was toting a large cloth bag. Poking out of the top was the red plastic roof of a child's playhouse. She walked up the porch steps, once more deftly avoiding the bad one, and marched in without knocking. I fought against the temptation to get my directional mic. This was another scene I did not need to be privy to, and lost. There's nothing so fascinating as a family argument. I think Leo Tolstoy said that. Or maybe it was Jonathan Franzen. By the time I got it plugged in and aimed through my open window at the open window across the street, the rhubarb was in full swing. Wanted you to know where we were, I would have damn well told you. Veda told me. She's a good girl, Marguerite said placidly. Lee's rage washed over her like a light summer shower. She was unloading mismatched dishes onto the counter with the speed of a blackjack dealer. Marina was looking at her with outright amazement. The playhouse sat on the floor next to June's baby blanket. June kicked her legs and ignored it. Of course she ignored it. What's a 4-month-old going to do with a playhouse? Ma, you have to leave us alone. You have to stop bringing things. I can take care of my family. Marina added her 2 cents worth. Mamushka, lise no. Marguerite laughed merrily. Lise no, honey, Lee always say no. This little man been doing it all his life, and it doesn't mean a thing. Ma takes care of him. She pinched his cheek the way a mother would pinch the cheek of a 6-year-old after he has done something naughty but undeniably cute. If Marina had tried that, I'm sure Lee would have knocked her block off. At some point, the jump rope girls had drifted onto the bald excuse for a lawn. They watched the argument as attentively as Globe groundlings checking out the newest Shakespeare offering in the standing room section. Only in the play we were watching, the shrew was going to come out on top. "What did she make you for dinner, honey? Was it something good?" "We had stew. Zakoya. That guy Gregory sent some coupons for the ShopRite." His mouth worked. Marguerite waited. "Did you want some, Ma?" "Zakoya, pretty okay, Mamoshka," Marina said with a hopeful smile. "No, I couldn't eat anything like that," Marguerite said. "Hell, Ma, you don't even know what it is." It was as if he hadn't spoken. "It would upset my stomach. Besides, I don't want to be on a city bus after 8 o'clock. There are too many drunk men on them after 8 o'clock. Lee, honey, you need to fix that step before someone breaks a leg." He muttered something, but Marguerite's attention had moved elsewhere. She swooped down like a hawk on a field mouse and grabbed June. With my binoculars, the baby's startled expression was unmistakable. "How's my little cutie tonight? How's my dear one? How's my little Davushka?" Her little Davushka, scared shitless, began to scream her head off. Lee made a move to take the baby. Marguerite's red lips peeled back from her teeth in what could have been a grin. But only if you wanted to be charitable. It looked more like a snarl to me. It must have to her son, too, because he stepped back. Marina was biting her lip, her eyes wide with dismay. "Ooh, Junie, Junie Mooney Spoonie." Marguerite marched back and forth across the threadbare green carpet, ignoring June's increasingly distressed wails, just as she'd ignored Lee's anger. Was she actually feeding on those wails? It looked that way to me. After a while, Marina could bear it no longer. She got up and went to Marguerite, who steamed away from her, holding the baby to her breasts. Even from across the street, I could imagine the sound of her big white nurse's shoes. Clud, clump, clud. Marina followed her. Marguerite, perhaps feeling her point was made, at last surrendered the baby. She pointed at Lee, then spoke to Marina in her loud English instructor's voice. "He gained weight when you were staying with me, because I fixed him all the things he likes, but he's still too damned skinny." Marina was looking at her over the top of the baby's head, her pretty eyes wide. Marguerite rolled her own, either in impatience or outright disgust, and put her face down to Marina's. The leaning lamp of Pisa was turned on, and the light skated across the lenses of Marguerite's cat's-eyes glasses. "Fix him what he'll eat. No soured cream, no yogurt. He's too skinny." "Skinny?" Marina said doubtfully. Safe in her mother's arms, June's weeping was winding down to watery hiccups. "Yes," Marguerite said. Then she whirled to Lee. "Fix that step." With that she left, only pausing to put a large smack on her granddaughter's head. When she walked back toward the bus stop, she was smiling. She looked younger. On the morning after Marguerite brought the playhouse, I was up at 6. I went to the drawn drapes and peeked out through the crack without even thinking about it. Spying on the house across the street had become a habit. Marina was sitting in one of the lawn chairs, smoking a cigarette. She was wearing pink rayon pajamas that were far too big for her. She had a new black eye, and there were spots of blood on the pajama shirt. She smoked slowly, inhaling deeply and staring out at nothing. After a while, she went back inside and made breakfast. Pretty soon, Lee came out and ate it. He didn't look at her. He read a book. "That guy Gregory sent some coupons for the ShopRite," Lee had told his mother, perhaps to explain the meat in the stew, maybe just to inform her that he and Marina weren't alone and friendless in Fort Worth. That appeared to have passed unnoticed by Mamushka, but it didn't pass unnoticed by me. Peter Gregory was the first link in the chain that would lead George de Mohrenschildt to Mercedes Street. Like de Mohrenschildt, Gregory was a Russian expat in the petroleum biz. He was originally from Siberia and taught Russian one night a week at the Fort Worth Library. Lee discovered this and called for an appointment to ask if he, Lee, could possibly get work as a translator. Gregory gave him a test and found his Russian passable. What Gregory was really interested in, what all the expats were interested in, Lee must have felt, was the former Marina Prusakova, a young girl from Minsk who had somehow managed to escape the clutches of the Russian bear, only to wind up in those of an American boar. Lee didn't get the job. Gregory hired Marina instead to give his son, Paul, Russian lessons. It was money the Oswalds desperately needed. It was also something else for Lee to resent. She was tutoring a rich kid twice a week while he was stuck putting together screen doors. The morning I observed Marina smoking on the porch, Paul Gregory, good-looking and about Marina's age, pulled up in a brand-new Buick. He knocked, and Marina, wearing heavy makeup that made me think of Bobby Jill, opened the door. Either mindful of Lee's possessiveness or because of rules of propriety she had learned back home, she gave him his lesson on the porch. It lasted an hour and a half. June lay between them on her blanket, and when she cried, the two of them took turns holding her. It was a nice little scene, although Mr. Oswald would probably not have thought so. Around noon, Paul's father pulled up behind the Buick. There were 2 men and 2 women with him. They brought groceries. The elder Gregory hugged his son, then kissed Marina on the cheek, the one that wasn't swollen. There was a lot of talk in Russian. The younger Gregory was lost, but Marina was found. She lit up like a neon sign. She invited them in. Soon they were sitting in the living room drinking iced tea and talking. Marina's hands flew like excited birds. June went from hand to hand and lap to lap. I was fascinated. The Russian émigré community had found the girl woman who had become their darling. How could she be anything else? She was young, she was a stranger in a strange land. She was beautiful. Of course, Beauty happened to be married to the Beast, a surly young American who hit her, bad, and who believed passionately in a system these upper-middle-class folks had just as passionately rejected. Far worse. Yet Lee would accept their groceries with only occasional outbursts of temper, and when they came with furnishings, a new bed, a bright pink crib for the baby, he accepted these too. He hoped the Russians would get him out of the hole he was in, but he didn't like them. And by the time he moved his family to Dallas in November of '62, he must have known his feelings were heartily reciprocated. Why would they like him, he must have thought. He was ideologically pure. They were cowards who had abandoned Mother Russia when she was on her knees in '43, who'd licked the Germans' jackboots and then fled to the United States when the war was over, quickly embracing the American way, which to Oswald meant saber-rattling, minority-oppressing, worker-exploiting crypto-fascism. Some of this I knew from Al's notes. Most of it I saw played out on the stage across the street, or deduced from the only important conversation my lamp bug picked up and recorded. On the evening of August 25th, a Saturday, Marina dolled up in a pretty blue dress and popped June into a corduroy romper with appliqued flowers on the front. Lee, looking sour, emerged from the bedroom in what had to be his only suit. It was a moderately hilarious wool box that could only have been made in Russia. It was a hot night, and I imagined he would be wringing with sweat before it was over. They walked carefully down the porch steps, the bad one still hadn't been fixed, and set off for the bus stop. I got into my car and drove up to the corner of Mercedes Street and Winscott Road. I could see them standing by the telephone pole with its white painted stripe, arguing. Big surprise there. The bus came. The Oswalds got on. I followed just as I had followed Frank Dunning in Derry. History repeats itself is another way of saying the past harmonizes. They got off the bus in a residential neighborhood on the north side of Dallas. I parked and watched them walk down to a small but handsome fieldstone and timber Tudor house. The carriage lamps at the end of the walk glowed softly in the dusk. There was no crabgrass on this lawn. Everything about the place shouted, "America works." Marina led the way to the house with the baby in her arms. Lee, lagging slightly behind, looking lost in his double-breasted jacket, which swung almost to the back of his knees. Marina pushed Lee in front of her and pointed at the bell. He rang it. Peter Gregory and his son came out, and when June put her arms out to Paul, the young man laughed and took her. Lee's mouth twitched downward when he saw this. Another man came out. I recognized him from the group that had arrived on the day of Paul Gregory's first language lesson. And he had been back to the Oswald place 3 or 4 times since, bringing groceries, toys for June, or both. I was pretty sure his name was George Boo. Yes, another George. The past harmonizes in all sorts of ways. And although he was pushing 60, I had an idea he was seriously crushing on Marina. According to the short-order cook who'd gotten me into this, Boo was the one who persuaded Peter Gregory to throw the get-acquainted party. George de Mohrenschildt wasn't there, but he'd hear about it shortly thereafter. Boo would tell de Mohrenschildt about the Oswalds and their peculiar marriage. He would also tell de Mohrenschildt that Lee Oswald had made a scene at the party, praising socialism and the Russian collectives. "The young man strikes me as crazy," Boo would say. De Mohrenschildt, a lifelong connoisseur of crazy, would decide he had to meet this odd couple for himself. Why did Oswald blow his top at Peter Gregory's party, offending the well-meaning expats who might otherwise have helped him? I didn't know for sure, but I had a pretty good idea. There's Marina, charming them all, especially the men, in her blue dress. There's June, pretty as a Woolworth's baby picture in her charity jumper with the sewn-on flowers. And there's Lee, sweating in his ugly suit. He's keeping up with the rapid ebb and flow of Russian better than young Paul Gregory, but in the end, he's still left behind. It must have infuriated him to have to kowtow to these people and to eat their salt. I hope it did. I hope it hurt. I didn't linger. What I cared about was de Mohrenschildt, the next link in the chain. He would arrive on stage soon. Meanwhile, all 3 Oswalds were finally out of 2703 and would be until at least 10 o'clock. Given that the following day was Sunday, maybe even later. I drove back to activate the bug in their living room. Mercedes Street was partying hardy that Saturday night, but the field behind Chez Oswald was silent and deserted. I thought my key would work on the back door as well as the front, but that was a theory I never had to test because the back door was unlocked. During my time in Fort Worth, I never once used the key I'd purchased from Ivy Templeton. Life is full of ironies. The place was heartbreakingly neat. The high chair had been placed between the parents' seats at the little table in the kitchen where they took their meals, the tray wiped gleaming clean. The same was true of the peeling surface of the counter and the sink with its rusty hard water ring. I made a bet with myself that Marina would have left Rosette's jumper-clad girls and went into what was now June's room to check. I had brought a penlight and shined it around the walls. Yes, they were still there, although in the dark they were more ghostly than cheerful. June probably looked at them as she lay in her crib sucking her baki. I wondered if she would remember them later on some deep level of her mind. Crayola ghost girls. Jimla. I thought, for no reason at all, and shivered. I moved the bureau, attached the tap wire to the lamp's plug, and fed it through the hole I drilled in the wall. All fine. But then I had a bad moment. Very bad. When I moved the bureau back into place, it bumped against the wall and the leaning lamp of Pisa toppled. If I'd had time to think, I would have frozen in place and the damn thing would have shattered on the floor. Then what, remove the bug and leave the pieces? Hope they'd accept the idea that the lamp, unsteady to begin with, had fallen on its own? Most people would buy that, but most people don't have reason to be paranoid about the FBI. Lee might find the hole I'd drilled in the wall. If he did, the butterfly would spread its wings. But I didn't have time to think. I reached out and caught the lamp on the way down. Then I just stood there holding it and shaking. It was hot as an oven in the little house, and I could smell the stink of my own sweat. Would they smell it when they came back? How could they not? I wondered if I were mad. Surely the smart thing would be to remove the bug and then remove myself. I could reconnect with Oswald on April 10th of next year. Watch him try to assassinate General Edwin Walker, and if he was on his own, I could then kill him just as I had Frank Dunning. KISS, K-I-S-S, as they say in Christie's AA meetings. Keep it simple, stupid. Why in God's name was I fucking with a bugged thrift shop lamp when the future of the world was at stake? It was Al Templeton who answered. You're here because the window of uncertainty is still open. You're here because if George de Mohrenschildt is more than he appears, then maybe Oswald wasn't the one. You're here to save Kennedy, and making sure starts now. So put that fucking lamp back where it belongs. I put the lamp back where it belonged, although its unsteadiness worried me. What if Lee knocked it off the bureau himself and saw the bug inside when the ceramic base shattered? For that matter, what if Lee and de Mohrenschildt conversed in this room, but with the lamp off, and in tones too low for my long-distance mic to pick up? Then it all would have been for nothing. You'll never make an omelet thinking that way, buddy. What convinced me was the thought of Sadie. I loved her and she loved me, at least she had. And I'd thrown that away to come here to this shitty street. And by Christ, I wasn't going to leave without at least trying to hear what George de Mohrenschildt had to say for himself. I slipped through the back door and with the penlight clamped in my teeth, connected the tap wire to the tape recorder. I slid the recorder into a rusty Crisco can to protect it from the elements, then concealed it in the little nest of bricks and boards I'd already prepared. Then I went back to my own shitty little house on that shitty little street and began to wait. They never used the lamp until it got almost too dark to see. Saving on the electricity bill, I suppose. Besides, Lee was a working man. He went to bed early, and she went when he did. The first time I checked the tape, what I had was mostly Russian, and draggy Russian at that, given the super slow speed of the recorder. If Marina tried out her English vocabulary, Lee would reprimand her. Nevertheless, he sometimes spoke to June in English if the baby was fussy, always in low, soothing tones. Sometimes he even sang to her. The super-slow recordings made him sound like an orc trying its hand at "Rock-a-bye, baby." Twice I heard him hit Marina, and the second time Russian wasn't good enough to express his rage. "You worthless, nagging cunt. I guess maybe my ma was right about you." This was followed by the slam of a door and the sound of Marina crying. It cut out abruptly as she turned off the lamp. On the evening of September 4th, I saw a kid, 13 or so, come to the Oswald store with a canvas sack over his shoulder. Lee, barefoot and dressed in a T-shirt and jeans, opened up. They spoke. Lee invited him inside, They spoke some more. At one point, Lee picked up a book and showed it to the kid, who looked at it dubiously. There was no chance of using the directional mic because the weather had turned cool and the windows over there were shut. But the leaning lamp of Pisa was on, and when I retrieved the second tape late the following night, I was treated to an amusing conversation. By the third time I played it, I hardly heard the slow drag of the voices. The kid was selling subscriptions to a newspaper, or maybe it was a magazine, called Grit. He informed the Oswalds that it had all sorts of interesting stuff the New York papers couldn't be bothered with. He labeled this country news, plus sports and gardening tips. It also had what he called fiction stories and comic strips. "You won't get Dixie Dugan in the Times-Herald," he informed them. "My mama loves Dixie." "Well, son, that's fine," Lee said. "You're quite the little businessman, aren't you?" Yes, sir." "Tell me how much you make." "I don't get but 4 cents on every dime, but that ain't the big thing, sir. Mostly what I like is the prizes. They're way better than the ones you get selling Cloverine salve. Nuts to that. I'm going to get me a .22. My dad said I could have it." "Son, do you know you're being exploited?" "Huh?" "They take the dimes. You get pennies and the promise of a rifle." "Lee, he a nice boy," Marina said. "Be nice. Leave alone." Lee ignored her. "You need to know what's in this book, son. Can you read what's on the front?" "Oh, yes, sir. It says The Condition of the Working Class by Friedrich Engels. Engels. It's all about what happens to boys who think they're going to wind up millionaires by selling stuff door to door." "I don't want to be no millionaire," the boy objected. "I just want a .22 so I can plink rats at the dump like my friend Hank." "You make pennies selling their newspapers. They make dollars selling your sweat and the sweat of a million boys like you. The free market isn't free. You need to educate yourself, son. I did, and I started when I was just your age." Lee gave the Grit newsboy a 10-minute lecture on the evils of capitalism, complete with choice quotes from Karl Marx. The boy listened patiently, then asked, "So, you gonna buy a subscription?" "Son, have you listened to a single word I've said?" "Yes, sir." "Then you should know that this system has stolen from me, just as it's stealing from you and your family. You broke? Why didn't you say so?" "What I've been trying to do is explain to you why I'm broke." "Well, golly, I could have tried 3 more houses, but now I have to go home because it's almost my curfew." "Good luck," Marina said. The front door squalled open on its old hinges, then rattled shut. It was too tired to thump. There was a long silence. Then Lee said in a flat voice, "You see, that's what we're up against." Not long after, the lamp went out. My new phone stayed mostly silent. Deke called once, one of those quick how-you-doing duty calls, but that was all. I told myself I couldn't expect more. School was back in, and the first few weeks were always harum-scarum. Deke was busy because Miss Ellie had unretired him. He told me that, after some grumbling, he had allowed her to put his name on the substitute list. Ellie wasn't calling because she had 5,000 things to do and probably 500 little brush fires to put out. I realized only after Deke hung up that he hadn't mentioned Sadie. And 2 nights after Lee's lecture to the newsboy, I decided I had to talk to her. I had to hear her voice, even if all she had to say was, "Please don't call me, George, it's over." As I reached for the phone, it rang. I picked it up and said with complete certainty, "Hello, Sadie. Hello, honey." There was a moment of silence, long enough for me to think I'd been wrong after all, that someone was going to say, I'm not Sadie, I'm just some putz who dialed a wrong number. Then she said, How did you know it was me? I almost said harmonics, and she might have understood that, but might wasn't good enough. This was an important call, and I didn't want to screw it up. Desperately didn't want to screw it up. Through most of what followed, there were two of me on the phone. George, who was speaking out loud, and Jake on the inside saying all the things George couldn't. Maybe there are always two on each end of the conversation when good love hangs in the balance. Because I've been thinking about you all day, I said. I've been thinking of you all summer. How are you? I'm fine. I'm lonely. How about you? How was your summer? Did you get it done? Have you cut your legal ties to your weird husband? Yes, she said. Done deal. Isn't that one of the things you say, George? Done deal? I guess so. How's school? How's the library? George, are we going to talk like this, or are we going to talk? All right. I sat down on my lumpy second-hand couch. Let's talk. Are you okay? Yes, but I'm unhappy, and I'm very confused. She hesitated, then said, I was working at Harrah's. You probably know that, as a cocktail waitress, and I met somebody. Oh? Oh, shit. Yes, a very nice man, charming, a gentleman, just shy of 40. His name is Roger Beaton. He's an aide to the Republican senator from California, Tom Kuchel. He's the minority whip in the Senate. You know, Kuchel, I mean, not Roger. She laughed, but not the way you do when something's funny. Should I be glad you met someone nice? I don't know, George. Are you glad? No. I want to kill him. Roger is handsome, she said in a flat, just-the-facts voice. He's pleasant. He went to Yale. He knows how to show a girl a good time. And he's tall. The second me would no longer keep silent. I want to kill him. That made her laugh, and the sound of it was a relief. I'm not telling you this to hurt you or make you feel bad. Really? Then why are you telling me? We went out 3 or 4 times. He kissed me. We made out a little, just necking like kids. I not only want to kill him, I want to do it slowly. But it wasn't the same. Maybe it could be in time. Maybe not. He gave me his number in Washington and told me to call him if I... How did he put it? If you get tired of shelving books and carrying a torch for the one that got away. I think that was the gist of it. He says he's going places and that he needs a good woman to go with him. He thought I might be that woman. Of course, men say stuff like that. I'm not as naive as I once was, but sometimes they mean it. Sadie. Still, it wasn't quite the same. She sounded thoughtful, absent. And for the first time I wondered if something other than doubt about her personal life might be wrong with her. If she might be sick. On the plus side, there was no broom in evidence. Of course, sometimes men hide the broom, don't they? Johnny did. You did too, George. Sadie? Yes? Are you hiding a broom? There was a long moment of silence, much longer than the one when I'd answered the phone with her name, and much longer than I expected. At last she said, I don't know what you mean. You don't sound like yourself, that's all. I told you I'm very confused, and I'm sad, because you're still not ready to tell me the truth, are you? If I could, I would. You know something interesting. You have good friends in Jody, not just me, and none of them know where you live. Sadie, You say it's Dallas, but you're on the Elmhurst exchange, and Elmhurst is Fort Worth." I'd never thought of that. What else hadn't I thought of? "Sadie, all I can tell you is that what I'm doing is very important." "Oh, I'm sure it is. And what Senator Kuchel's doing is very important, too." Roger was at pains to tell me that, and to tell me that if I joined him in Washington, I would be more or less sitting at the feet of greatness, or in the doorway to history, or something like that. Power excites him. It was one of the few things it was hard to like about him. What I still think is, who am I to sit at the feet of greatness? I'm just a divorced librarian. "Who am I to stand in the doorway to history?" I said. What did you say, George?" "Nothing, hon. Maybe you better not call me that." "Sorry, I'm not." "What exactly are we talking about?" "You and me, and whether or not that still makes an us. It would help if you could tell me why you're in Texas, because I know you didn't come to write a book or teach school. Telling you could be dangerous." "We're all in danger," she said. "Johnny's right about that. Will I tell you something Roger told me?" "All right. Where did he tell you, Sadie? And were the two of you vertical or horizontal when the conversation took place?" "He'd had a drink or two, and he got gossipy. We were in his hotel room, but don't worry, I kept my feet on the floor and all my clothes on. I wasn't worrying. If you weren't, I'm disappointed in you." "All right, I was worried. What did he say?" "He said there's a rumor that there's going to be some sort of major deal in the Caribbean this fall or winter. A flashpoint, he called it. I'm assuming he meant Cuba. He said that idiot JFK is going to put us all in the soup just to show he's got balls." I remembered all the end-of-the-world crap her former husband had poured into her ears. "Anyone who reads the paper can see it coming," he'd told her. "We'll die with sores all over our bodies and coughing up our lungs." Stuff like that leaves an impression, especially when spoken in tones of dry scientific certainty. Leaves an impression. A scar, more like it. "Sadie, that's crap." "Oh?" She sounded nettled. "I suppose you have the inside scoop, and Senator Kuchel doesn't?" "Let's say I do." "Let's not. I'll wait for you to come clean a little longer, but not much. Maybe just because you're a good dancer." "Then let's go dancing," I said a little wildly. "Good night, George." And before I could say anything else, she hung up. I started to call her back, but when the operator said, "Number, please," sanity reasserted itself. I put the phone back in its cradle. She had said what she needed to say. Trying to get her to say more would only make things worse. I tried to tell myself that her call had been nothing but a stratagem to get me off the dime, a speak-for-yourself John Alden kind of thing. It wouldn't work because that wasn't Sadie. It had seemed more like a cry for help. I picked up the phone again, and this time when the operator asked for a number, I gave her one. The phone rang twice on the other end, and then Ellen Doherty said, "Yes, who is it, please?" "Hi, Miss Ellie, it's me, George." Maybe that moment of silence thing was catching. I waited. Then she said, "Hello, George. I've been neglecting you, haven't I? It's just that I've been awfully busy, sure. I know what the first week or two's like, Ellie. I called because Sadie just called me." "Oh?" She sounded very cautious. "If you told her my number was on a Fort Worth exchange instead of Dallas, it's okay. I wasn't gossiping. I hope you understand that. I thought she had a right to know. I care for Sadie. Of course I care for you too, George, but you're gone. She's not." I did understand, although it hurt. The feeling of being in a space capsule bound for the outer depths recurred. I'm fine with that, Ellie, and it really wasn't much of a fib. I expect to be moving to Dallas soon. No response. And what could she say? Perhaps you are, but we both know you're a bit of a liar. I didn't like the way she sounded. Does she seem all right to you? I'm not sure I want to answer that question. If I said no, you might come roaring down to see her, and she doesn't want to see you. Not as things stand. Actually, she had answered my question. Was she okay when she came back? She was fine, glad to see us all. But now she sounds distracted and says she feels sad. Is that so surprising? Miss Ellie spoke with asperity. There are lots of memories here for Sadie, many of them connected to a man she still has feelings for. A nice man and a lovely teacher, but one who arrived flying false colors. That one really hurt. It seemed like something else. She spoke about some sort of coming crisis that she heard about from the Yaley who was sitting in the doorway of history. From someone she met in Nevada. Her husband filled her head with a lot of nonsense. Her head, her pretty little head. Not just asperity now, outright anger. It made me feel small and mean. George, I have a stack of folders a mile high in front of me, and I need to get to them. You cannot psychoanalyze Sadie Dunhill at long distance, and I cannot help you with your love life. The only thing I can do is to advise you to come clean if you care for her. Sooner rather than later. You haven't seen her husband around, I suppose. No! Good night, George. For the second time that night, a woman I cared about hung up on me. That was a new personal record. I went into the bedroom and began to undress. Fine when she arrived. Glad to be back with all her Jody friends. Not so fine now, because she was torn between the handsome, on the fast track to success new guy and the tall, dark stranger with the invisible past. That would probably be the case in a romance novel, but if it was the case here, why hadn't she been down at the mouth when she came back? An unpleasant thought occurred to me. Maybe she was drinking. A lot. Secretly. Wasn't it possible my wife had been a secret heavy drinker for years, before I married her, in fact? And the past harmonizes with itself. It would be easy to dismiss that, to say that Miss Ellie would have spotted the signs, but drunks can be clever. Sometimes it's years before people start to get wise. If Sadie was showing up for work on time, Ellie might not notice that she was doing so with bloodshot eyes and mints on her breath. The idea was probably ridiculous. All my suppositions were suspect, each one colored by how much I still cared for Sadie. I lay back on my bed looking up at the ceiling. In the living room, the oil stove gurgled. It was another cool night. "Let it go, buddy," Al said. "You have to. Remember, you're not here to get the girl, the gold watch, and everything." "Yeah, Al, got it. Besides, she's probably fine. You're the one with the problem." More than just one, actually. And it was a long time before I fell asleep. The following Monday, when I made one of my regular drive-bys of 214 West Neely Street in Dallas, I observed a long gray funeral hack parked in the driveway. The two fat ladies were standing on the porch watching a couple of men in dark suits lift a stretcher into the rear. On it was a sheeted form. On the tottery-looking balcony above the porch, the young couple from the upstairs apartment was also watching. Their youngest child was sleeping in his mother's arms. The wheelchair with the ashtray clamped to the arm stood orphaned under the tree where the old man had spent most of his days last summer. I pulled over and stood by my car until the hearse left. Then, although I realized the timing was rather, shall we say, crass, I crossed the street and walked up the path to the porch. At the foot of the stairs, I tipped my hat. "Ladies, I'm very sorry for your loss." The older of the two, the wife, who was now a widow, I assumed, said, "You've been here before." "Indeed I have," I thought of saying. "This thing is bigger than pro football." "He saw you." "Not accusing, just stating a fact. I've been looking for an apartment in this neighborhood. Will you be keeping this one?" "No," the younger one said. "He had some insurance, about the only thing he did have, except for some medals in a box." She sniffed. "I tell you, it broke my heart a little to see how grief-stricken those two ladies were." "He said you was a ghost," the widow told me. "He said he could see right through you. Of course, he was as crazy as a shithouse mouse. Last 3 years, ever since he had his stroke and they put him on that pea bag. Me and Ida's going back to Oklahoma." Try Moselle, I thought. That's where you're supposed to go when you give up your apartment. "What do you want?" the younger one asked. "We got to take him a suit on down to the funerary home." "I'd like the number of your landlord," I said. The widow's eyes gleamed. "What'd it be worth to you, mister?" "I'll give it to you for free," said the young woman on the second-floor balcony. The bereaved daughter looked up and told her to shut her fucking mouth. That was the thing about Dallas. Dairy, too. Neighborly. Chapter 19. George de Mohrenschildt made his grand entrance on the afternoon of September 15th, a dark and rainy Saturday. He was behind the wheel of a coffee-colored Cadillac right out of a Chuck Berry song. With him was a man I knew, George Boo, and one I didn't, a skinny whip of a guy with a fuzz of white hair and the ramrod back of a fellow who spent a good deal of time in the military and is still happy about it. De Mohrenschildt went around to the back of the car and opened the trunk. I dashed to get the distance mic. When I came back with my gear, Boo had a folded-up playpen under his arm, and the military-looking guy had an armload of toys. De Mohrenschildt was empty-handed and mounted the steps in front of the other two with his head up and his chest thrown out. He was tall and powerfully built. His graying hair was combed slantwise back from his broad forehead in a way that said, to me at least, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair, for I am George." I plugged in the tape recorder, put on the headphones, and tilted the mic-equipped bowl across the street. Marina was out of sight. Lee was sitting on the couch, reading a thick paperback by the light of the lamp on the bureau. When he heard footsteps on the porch, he looked up with a frown and tossed his book on the coffee table. More goddamn expats, he might have been thinking. But he went to answer the knock. He held out his hand to the silver-haired stranger on his porch, but de Mohrenschildt surprised him and me by pulling Lee into his arms and bussing him on both cheeks. Then he held him back by the shoulders. His voice was deep and accented. German rather than Russian, I thought. "Let me look at a young man who has journeyed so far and come back with his ideals intact." Then he pulled Lee into another hug. Oswald's head just showed above the bigger man's shoulder, and I saw something even more surprising. Lee Harvey Oswald was smiling. Marina came out of the baby's room with June in her arms. She exclaimed with pleasure when she saw Boo and thanked him for the playpen and what she called in her stilted English, the child's planks. Boo introduced the skinny man as Lawrence Orlov, Colonel Lawrence Orlov, if you please, and de Mohrenschildt as a friend of the Russian community. Boo and Orlov went to work setting the playpen up in the middle of the floor. Marina stood with them, chatting in Russian. Like Boo, Orlov couldn't seem to take his eyes off the young Russian mother. Marina was wearing a smock top and shorts showcasing legs that went up forever. Lee's smile was gone. He was retreating into his usual gloom. Only de Mohrenschildt wouldn't let him. He spotted Lee's paperback, sprang to the coffee table, and picked it up. Atlas shrugged, speaking just to Lee, completely ignoring the others who were admiring the new playpen. Ayn Rand, what is a young revolutionary doing with this? Know your enemy, Lee said, and when de Mohrenschildt burst into a hearty roar of laughter, Lee's smile resurfaced. And what do you make of Miss Rand's cri de coeur? That struck a chord when I played the tape back. I listened to the comment twice before it clicked. It was almost exactly the same phrase Mimi Corcoran had used when asking me about The Catcher in the Rye. I think she swallowed the poison bait, Oswald said. Now she's making money by selling it to other people. Exactly, mein Freund. I've never heard it put better. There will come a day when the Rands of the world will answer for their crimes. Do you believe that? I know it, Lee said. He spoke matter-of-factly. De Mohrenschildt patted the couch. Sit by me. I want to hear of your adventures in the homeland. But first, Boo and Orlov approached Lee and de Mohrenschildt. There was a lot of back and forth in Russian. Lee looked dubious, but when de Mohrenschildt said something to him, also in Russian, Lee nodded and spoke briefly to Marina. The way he flicked his hand at the door made it pretty clear. Go on, then, go. De Mohrenschildt tossed his car keys to Boo, who fumbled them. De Mohrenschildt and Lee exchanged a look of shared amusement as Boo grubbed them off the dirty green carpet. Then they left, Marina carrying the baby in her arms, and drove off in de Mohrenschildt's boat of a Cadillac. Now we have peace, mein Freund, de Mohrenschildt said. And the men will open their wallets, which is good, yes? I get tired of them always opening their wallets, Lee said. Rena's starting to forget that we didn't come back to America just to buy a damn freezer and a bunch of dresses. De Mohrenschildt waved this away. Sweat from the back of the capitalist hog. Man, isn't it enough that you live in this depressing place? Lee said, It sure isn't much, is it? De Mohrenschildt clapped him on the back, almost hard enough to knock the smaller man off the couch. Cheer up. What you take now, you give back 1,000-fold later. Isn't that what you believe? And when Lee nodded, Now, tell me how things stand in Russia, comrade. May I call you comrade, or have you repudiated that form of address? You can call me anything but late to dinner, Oswald said, and laughed. I could see him opening to de Mohrenschildt the way a flower opens to the sun after days of rain. Lee talked about Russia. He was long-winded and pompous. I wasn't very interested in his rap about how the communist bureaucracy had hijacked all the country's wonderful pre-war socialist ideals. He passed over Stalin's Great Purge in the 30s, nor was I interested in his judgment that Nikita Khrushchev was an idiot. You could hear the same idle bullshit about American leaders in any barbershop or shoeshine parlor right here. Oswald might be going to change the course of history in a mere 14 months, but he was a bore. What interested me was the way de Mohrenschildt listened. He did it as the world's more charming and magnetic people do, always asking the right question at the right time, never fidgeting or taking his eyes from the speaker's face, making the other guy feel like the most knowledgeable, brilliant, and intellectually savvy person on the planet. This might have been the first time in his life that Lee had been listened to in such a way. There's only one hope for socialism that I see, Lee finished, and that's Cuba. There, the revolution is still pure. I hope to go there one day. I may become a citizen. De Mohrenschildt nodded gravely. You could do far worse. I have been many times before the current administration made it difficult to travel there. It is a beautiful country, and now, thanks to Fidel, it's a beautiful country that belongs to the people who live there. I know it. Lee's face was shining. But, the Mohrenschildt raised a lecturely finger, if you believe the American capitalists will let Fidel, Raul, and Che work their magic without interference, you're living in a dream world. Already the wheels are turning. You know this fellow Walker? My ears picked up. Edwin Walker, the general who got fired? The very one. I know him. Lives in Dallas. Ran for governor and got his ass kicked. Then he goes over to Mississippi to stand with Ross Barnett when James Meredith integrated Ole Miss. He's just another segregationist little Hitler. A racist, certainly, but for him, the segregationist cows and the clan bobos are just a blind. He sees the push for Negro rights as a club to beat at the socialist principles that so haunt him and his ilk. James Meredith, a communist. The NAACP, a front. SNCC, black on top, red inside. Sure, Lee said, it's how they work. I couldn't tell if de Mohrenschildt was actually invested in the things he was saying, or if he was just winding Lee up for the hell of it. And what do the Walkers and the Barnetts and the capering revivalist preachers like Billy Graham and Billy James Haggis see as the beating heart of this evil, nigger-loving communist monster? Russia. I know it. And where do they see the grasping hand of communism just 90 miles from the shores of the United States? Cuba. Walker no longer wears the uniform, but his best friend does. Do you know who I'm talking about? Lee shook his head. His eyes never left de Mohrenschildt's face. Curtis LeMay, another racist who sees communists behind every bush. What do Walker and LeMay insist that Kennedy do? Bomb Cuba. Then invade Cuba, then make Cuba the 51st state. Their humiliation at the Bay of Pigs has only made them more determined. De Mohrenschildt made his own exclamation marks by pounding his fist on his thigh. Men like LeMay and Walker are far more dangerous than Durant Beach, and not because they have guns, because they have followers. I know the danger, Lee said. I've started organizing a hands-off Cuba group here in Fort Worth. I've got 12 people interested already. That was bold. To the best of my knowledge, the only thing Lee had been organizing in Fort Worth was a passel of aluminum screen doors, plus the backyard clothes whirligig on the few occasions when Marina could persuade him to hang the baby's diapers on it. You'd better work fast, de Mohrenschildt said grimly. Cuba's a billboard for revolution. When the suffering people of Nicaragua and Haiti or the Dominican Republic look at Cuba, they see a peaceful, agrarian, socialist society where the dictator has been overturned and the secret police have been sent packing, sometimes with their truncheons stuck up their fat asses. Lee squalled laughter. They see the great sugar plantations and the slave labor farms of United Fruit turned over to the farmers. They see Standard Oil sent packing. They see the casinos, all run by the Lenski mob. I know it, Lee said. Shut down. The donkey shows have stopped, mein friend, and the women who used to sell their bodies and their daughters' bodies have found honest work again. A peon who would have died in the streets under the pig Batista can now go to a hospital and be treated like a man. And why? Because under Fidel, the doctor and the peon stand as equals. I know it, Lee said. It was his default position. De Mohrenschildt leaped from the couch and began to pace around the new playpen. Do you think Kennedy and his Irish cabal will let that billboard stand? That lighthouse flashing its message of hope? I sort of like Kennedy, Lee said, as if embarrassed to admit it, in spite of the Bay of Pigs. That was Eisenhower's plan, you know. Most of the GSA likes President Kennedy. Do you know what I mean by the GSA? I can assure you that the rabid she-weasel who wrote Atlas Shrugged knows. Great, stupid America. That's what I mean. The citizens of the USA will live happy and die content if they have a refrigerator that makes ice, 2 cars in their garage, and 77 Sunset Strip on their boob tubes. Great, stupid America loves Kennedy's smile. Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. He's a wonderful smile. I admit it. But did not Shakespeare say a man can smile and be a villain? Do you know that Kennedy has okayed a CIA plan to assassinate Castro? Yes, they've already tried and failed, thank God, 3 or 4 times. I have this from my oil contacts in Haiti and the DRL, and it's good information. Lee expressed dismay. But Fidel has a strong friend in Russia, de Mohrenschildt went on, still pacing. It isn't the Russia of Lenin's dreams or yours or mine. But they may have their own reasons for standing with Fidel if America tries another invasion. And mark my words, Kennedy is apt to try it, and soon. He'll listen to LeMay, he'll listen to Dulles, and Angleton of the CIA. All he needs is the right pretext, and then he'll go in just to show the world he's got balls. They went on talking about Cuba. When the Cadillac returned, the rear seat was full of groceries, enough for a month it looked like. Oh, shit, Lee said. They're back. And we're glad to see them, de Mohrenschildt said pleasantly. Stay for dinner, Lee said. Rena's not much of a cook, but I must go. My wife is waiting anxiously for my report, and I'll give her a good one. Bring her next time, shall I? Yeah, sure. They went to the door. Marina was talking with Boo and Orlov as the 2 men lifted cartons of canned goods from the trunk. But she wasn't just talking. She was flirting a little, too. Boo looked ready to fall on his knees. On the porch, Lee said something about the FBI. De Mohrenschildt asked him how many times. Lee held up 3 fingers. One agent called Fane. He came twice. Another named Hosty. Look them right in the eye and answer the questions, de Mohrenschildt said. You have nothing to fear, Lee. Not just because you are innocent, but because you are in the right. The others were looking at him now, and not just them. The jump rope girls had appeared, standing in the rut that served as a sidewalk on our block of Mercedes Street. De Mohrenschildt had an audience and was declaiming to it. You are ideologically dedicated, young Mr. Oswald, so of course they come. The Hoover gang. For all we know, they're watching now. Perhaps from down the block. Perhaps from that house right across the street. De Mohrenschildt stabbed his finger at my drawn drapes. Lee turned to look. I stood still in the shadows, glad I'd put down the sound-enhancing Tupperware bowl, even though it was now coated with black tape. I know who they are. Haven't they and their CIA first cousins been to visit me on many occasions, trying to browbeat me into informing on my Russian and South American friends? After the war, didn't they call me a closet Nazi? Haven't they claimed I hired the Tonton Macoute to beat and torture my competitors for oil leases in Haiti? Didn't they accuse me of bribing Papa Doc and paying for the Trujillo assassination? Yes, all of that and more. The jump rope girls were staring at him with their mouths open. So was Marina. Once he got going, George de Mohrenschildt swept everything before him. "Be courageous, Lee, when they come. Stand forward. Show them this." He grasped his shirt and tore it open. Buttons popped off and clattered to the porch. The jump rope girls gasped, too shocked to giggle. Unlike most American men of that time, de Mohrenschildt wore no undershirt. His skin was the color of oiled mahogany. Fatty breasts hung on old muscle. He pounded his right fist above his left nipple. "Tell them, here is mine heart, and mine heart is pure, and mine heart belongs to my cause. Tell them, even if Hoover rips my heart out of me, it will still beat, and 1,000 others will beat in time, then 10,000, then 100,000, then 1,000,000. Orlov put down the box of canned goods he was holding so he could offer a round of light, satiric applause. Marina's cheeks were flaming with color. Lee's face was the most interesting one. Like Paul of Tarsus on the Damascus Road, he'd had a revelation. The blindness had dropped from his eyes. De Mohrenschildt's preaching and shirt-ripping antics, not so very different from the tent show shenanigans of the right-wing evangelists he reviled, were deeply troubling to me. I had hoped that if I could listen in on a heart-to-heart between the two men, it might go a long way toward eliminating de Mohrenschildt as a real factor in the Walker attempt, and hence the Kennedy assassination. I'd gotten the heart-to-heart, but it made things worse instead of better. One thing seemed clear. It was time to bid Mercedes Street a not-so-fond adieu. I had rented the ground-floor apartment at 214 West Neely. On the 24th of September, I packed up my aging Ford Sunliner with my few clothes, my books, and my typewriter and moved them to Dallas. The two fat ladies had left behind a sick-room stenchy pigsty. I did the cleanup myself, thanking God that Al's rabbit hole emerged in a time when aerosol air freshener was available. I bought a portable TV at a yard sale and plunked it down on the kitchen counter next to the stove, which I thought of as the repository of antique grease. As I swept, washed, scrubbed, and sprayed, I watched crime shows like The Untouchables and sitcoms like Car 54, Where Are You? When the thumps and shouts of the kids upstairs quit for the night, I turned in and slept like the dead. There were no dreams. I held on to my place on Mercedes Street but didn't see much at 2703. Sometimes Marina popped June into a stroller, another gift from her elderly admirer, Mr. Boo, and rolled her up to the warehouse parking lot and back again. In the afternoons, after school let out, the jump rope girls often accompanied them. Marina even jumped herself a couple of times, chanting in Russian. The sight of her mother pogoing up and down with that great cloud of dark hair flying made the baby laugh. The jump rope girls laughed too. Marina didn't mind. She talked a lot with them and never looked irritated when they giggled and corrected her. She looked pleased, in fact. Lee didn't want her to learn English, but she was learning it anyway. Good for her. On October 2nd, 1962, I woke to eerie silence in my Neely Street apartment. No running feet overhead. No young mother yelling at the older two to get ready for school. They had moved out in the middle of the night. I went upstairs and tried my key on their door. It didn't work, but the lock was of the spring variety and I popped it easily with a coat hanger. I spied an empty bookcase in the living room. I drilled a small hole in the floor, plugged in the second bugged lamp, and fed the tap wire through the hole and into my downstairs apartment. Then I moved the bookcase over it. The bug worked fine, but the reels of the cunning little Japanese tape recorder only turned when prospective tenants came to look at the apartment and happened to try the lamp. There were lookers, but no takers. Until the Oswalds moved in, I had the Neely Street address entirely to myself. After the bumptious carnival that was Mercedes Street, that was a relief, although I kind of missed the jump rope girls. They were my Greek chorus. I slept in my Dallas apartment at night and watched Marina stroll the baby in Fort Worth by day. While I was so occupied, another 60s watershed moment was approaching, but I ignored it. I was preoccupied with the Oswalds, who were undergoing another domestic spasm. Lee came home early from work one day during the second week of October. Marina was out walking June. They spoke at the foot of the driveway across the street. Near the end of the conversation, Marina spoke in English. "What is laid off mean?" He explained in Russian. Marina spread her hands in a what-can-you-do gesture and hugged him. Lee kissed her cheek, then took the baby out of the stroller. June laughed as he held her high over his head, her hands reaching down to tug at his hair. They went inside together. Happy little family bearing up under temporary adversity. That lasted until 5 in the afternoon. I was getting ready to drive back to Neely Street when I spied Marguerite Oswald approaching from the bus stop on Winscott Road. Here comes trouble, I thought, and how right I was. Once again, Marguerite avoided the still unrepaired ha-ha step. Once more she entered without knocking. Fireworks followed immediately. It was a warm evening and the windows were open over there. I didn't bother with the distance mic. Lee and his mother argued at full volume. He hadn't been laid off from his job at Leslie Welding after all, it seemed. He had just walked away. The boss called Veda Oswald, looking for him, because they were short-handed, and when he got no help from Robert's wife, he called Marguerite. "I lied for you, Lee," Marguerite shouted. "I said you had the flu. Why do you always make me lie for you?" "I don't make you do nothing," he shouted back. They were standing nose to nose in the living room. "I don't make you do nothing, and you do it anyway." "Lee, how are you going to support your family? You need a job." "Oh, I'll get a job. Don't you worry about that, Ma." "Where?" "I don't know." "Oh, Lee, how'll you pay the rent?" "But she's got plenty of friends." He jerked a thumb at Marina, who flinched. "They aren't good for much, but they'll be good for that. You need to get out of here, Ma. Go back home. Let me catch my breath." Marguerite darted to the playpen. "Where'd this here come from?" "The friends I told you about. Half of 'em's rich and the rest are trying. They like to talk to Rena." Lee sneered. "The older ones like to ogle her tits." "Lee!" Shocked voice, but a look on her face that was pleased. Was Mamushka pleased at the fury she heard in her son's voice? "Go on, Ma, give us some peace." "Does she understand that men who give things always want things in return? Does she, Lee? Get the hell out!" Shaking his fists, almost dancing in his impotent rage. Marguerite smiled. "You're upset. Of course you are. I'll come back when you're feeling more in control of yourself, and I'll help. I always want to help." Then abruptly, she rushed at Marina and the baby. It was as if she meant to attack them. She covered June's face with kisses, then strode across the room. At the door, she turned and pointed at the playpen. "Tell her to scrub that down, Lee. People's cast-offs always have germs. If the baby gets sick, you'll never be able to afford the doctor." "Ma, go." "I am, just now." Calm as cookies and milk, she twiddled her fingers in a girlish ta-ta gesture, and off she went. Marina approached Lee, holding the baby like a shield. They talked. Then they shouted. Family solidarity was gone with the wind. Marguerite had seen to that. Lee took the baby, rocked her in the crook of one arm, then, with absolutely no warning, punched his wife in the face. Marina went down, bleeding from the mouth and nose and crying loudly. Lee looked at her. The baby was also crying. Lee stroked June's fine hair, kissed her cheek, rocked her some more. Marina came back into view, struggling to her feet. Lee kicked her in the side, and down she went again. I could see nothing but the cloud of her hair. Leave him, I thought, even though I knew she wouldn't. Take the baby and leave him. Go to George Boo, warm his bed if you have to, but get away from that skinny, mother-ridden monster post-haste. But it was Lee who left her, at least temporarily. I never saw him on Mercedes Street again. It was their first separation. Lee went to Dallas to look for work. I don't know where he stayed. According to Al's notes, it was the Y, but that turned out to be wrong. Maybe he found a place in one of the cheap rooming houses downtown. I wasn't concerned. I knew they'd show up together to rent the apartment above me, and for the time being I'd had enough of him. It was a treat not to have to listen to his slowed-down voice saying, "I know it," a dozen times in every conversation. Thanks to George Boo, Marina landed on her feet. Not long after Marguerite's visit and Lee's decampment, Boo and another man arrived in a Chevy truck and moved her out. When the pickup left 2703 Mercedes, mother and daughter were riding in the bed. The pink suitcase Marina had brought from Russia had been lined with blankets, and June lay fast asleep in this makeshift nest. Marina put a steadying hand on the little girl's chest as the truck started rolling. The jump rope girls were watching, and Marina waved to them. They waved back. I found George de Mohrenschildt's address in the Dallas White Pages and followed him several times. I was curious about whom he might meet, although if it were a CIA man, a minion of the Lansky mob, or some other possible conspirator, I doubt I would have known it. All I can say is that he met no one that seemed suspicious to me. He went to work. He went to the Dallas Country Club where he played tennis or swam with his wife. They went out to a couple of strip clubs. He didn't bother the dancers, but had a penchant for fondling his wife's boobs and butt in public. She didn't seem to mind. On 2 occasions he met with Lee. Once it was at de Mohrenschildt's favorite strip club. Lee seemed uncomfortable with the milieu, and they didn't stay long. The second time they had lunch in a Browder Street coffee shop. There they remained until almost 2 in the afternoon, talking over endless cups of coffee. Lee started to get up, reconsidered, and ordered something else. The waitress brought him a piece of pie, and he handed her something, which she put in her apron pocket after a cursory glance. Instead of following when they left, I approached the waitress and asked if I could see what the young man had given her. "You can have it," she said, and gave me a sheet of yellow paper with black tabloid letters at the top. "Hands off Cuba." It urged interested persons to join the Dallas-Fort Worth branch of this fine organization. Don't let Uncle Sam dupe you. Write to P.O. Box 1919 for details of future meetings. "What did they talk about?" I asked. "Are you a cop?" "No, I tip better than the cops," I said, and handed her a $5 bill. "That stuff," she said, and pointed at the flyer, which Oswald had undoubtedly printed off at his new place of employment. Cuba, like I give a shit. But on the night of October 22nd, less than a week later, President Kennedy was also talking about Cuba. And then everybody gave a shit. It's a blues truism that you never miss your water until the well runs dry. But until the fall of 1962, I didn't realize that also applied to the patter of little feet shaking your ceiling. With the family from upstairs gone, 214 West Neely took on a creepy, haunted house vibe. I missed Sadie and began to worry about her almost obsessively. On second thought, you can strike the almost. Ellie Doherty and Deke Simmons didn't take my concern about her husband seriously. Sadie herself didn't take it seriously. For all I knew, she thought I was trying to scare her about John Clayton in order to keep her from pushing me entirely out of her life. None of them knew that if you removed the Sadie part, her name was only a syllable away from Doris Dunning. None of them knew about the harmonic effect which I seemed to be creating myself just by my presence in the land of ago. That being the case, who would be to blame if something happened to Sadie? The bad dreams started to come back. The gym lot dreams. I quit keeping tabs on George de Mohrenschildt and started taking long walks that began in the afternoon and didn't finish up back at West Neely Street until 9 or even 10 o'clock at night. I spent them thinking about Lee, now working as a photoprint trainee at a Dallas graphic arts company called Jagger's Child Stovall. Or about Marina, who had taken up temporary residence with a newly divorced woman named Alina Hall. The Hall woman worked for George Boo's dentist, and it was the dentist who had been behind the wheel of the pickup on the day Marina and June moved out of the dump on Mercedes Street. Mostly what I thought about was Sadie, and Sadie, and Sadie. On one of those strolls, feeling thirsty as well as depressed, I stopped into a neighborhood watering hole called the Ivy Room and ordered a beer. The jukebox was off and the patrons were unusually silent. When the waitress put my beer in front of me and immediately turned to face the TV over the bar, I realized that everyone was watching the man I had come to save. He was pale and grave. There were dark circles under his eyes. To halt this offensive build-up, a strict quarantine of all offensive equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, will be turned back. Christ Jesus, said a man in a cowboy hat. What does he think the Ruskies are going to do about that? Shut up, Bill, the bartender said. We need to hear this. It shall be the policy of this nation, Kennedy went on, to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. A woman at the end of the bar moaned and clutched her stomach. The man beside her put an arm around her, and she put her head on his shoulder. What I saw on Kennedy's face was fright and determination in equal measure. What I also saw was life, a total engagement with the job at hand. He was exactly 13 months from his date with the assassin's bullet. As a necessary military precaution, I have reinforced our base at Guantanamo and evacuated today the dependents of our personnel there. Drinks for the house on me, Bill the cowboy suddenly proclaimed, because this looks like the end of the road, amigos. He put 2 20s beside his shot glass, but the bartender made no move to pick them up. He was watching Kennedy, who was now calling on Chairman Khrushchev to eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace. The waitress who had served my beer, a rode hard and put away wet peroxide blonde of 50 or so, suddenly burst into tears. That decided me. I got off my stool, wove my way around the tables where men and women sat looking at the television like solemn children, and slipped into one of the phone booths next to the skee-ball machine. The operator told me to deposit 40 cents for the first 3 minutes. I dropped in 2 quarters. The payphone bonged mellowly. Faintly, I could still hear Kennedy talking in that nasal New England voice. Now he was accusing Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko of being a liar. No waffling there. "Connecting you now, sir," the operator said. Then she blurted, "Are you listening to the president? If you're not, you should turn on your TV or radio." "I'm listening," I said. Sadie would be too. Sadie, whose husband had spouted a lot of apocalyptic bullshit thinly coated with science. Sadie, whose Yale Politico friend had told her something big was going to pop in the Caribbean. A flashpoint, probably Cuba. I had no idea what I was going to say to soothe her, but that wasn't a problem. The phone rang and rang. I didn't like it. Where was she at 8:30 on a Monday night in Jody? At the movies? I didn't believe it. "Sir, your party doesn't answer." "I know it," I said, and grimaced when I heard Lee's pet phrase coming out of my mouth. My quarters clattered into the coin return when I hung up. I started to put them back in, then reconsidered. What good would it do to call Miss Ellie? I was in Miss Ellie's bad books now. Deke's too, probably. They'd tell me to go peddle my papers. When I walked back to the bar, Walter Cronkite was showing U-2 photos of the Soviet missile bases that were under construction. He said that many members of Congress were urging Kennedy to initiate bombing missions or launch a full-scale invasion immediately. American missile bases and the Strategic Air Command had gone to DEFCON 4 for the first time in history. "American B-52 bombers will soon be circling just outside the Soviet Union's borders," Cronkite was saying in that deep, portentous voice of his. "And this is obvious to all of us who've covered the last 7 years of this ever more frightening Cold War. The chances for a mistake, a potentially disastrous mistake, grow with each new escalation of—" "Now wait!" a man standing by the pool table shouted. "Bomb the living shit out of those commie cocksuckers right now!" There were a few cries of protest at this bloodthirsty sentiment, but they were mostly drowned out in a wave of applause. I left the Ivy Room and jogged back to Neely Street. When I got there, I jumped into my Sunliner and rolled wheels for Jody. My car radio, now working again, broadcast nothing but a heaping dish of doom as I chased my headlights down Highway 77. Even the DJs had caught nuclear flu, saying things like "God bless America" and "keep your powder dry." When the K-Life jock played Johnny Horton caterwauling the battle hymn of the Republic, I snapped it off. It was too much like the day after 9/11. I kept the pedal to the metal in spite of the Sunliner's increasingly distressed engine and the way the needle on the engine temp dial kept creeping toward H. The roads were all but deserted, and I turned into Sadie's driveway at just a little past 12:30 on the morning of the 23rd. Her yellow VW Beetle was parked in front of the closed garage doors, and the lights were on downstairs. But there was no answer when I rang the doorbell. I went around back and hammered on the kitchen door, also to no effect. I liked it less and less. She kept a spare key under the back step. I fished it out and let myself in. The unmistakable aroma of whiskey hit my nose, and the stale smell of cigarettes. "Sadie?" Nothing. I crossed the kitchen to the living room. There was an overflowing ashtray on the low table in front of the couch, and liquid soaking into the Life and Look magazine spread out there. I put my fingers into it, then raised them to my nose. Scotch. Fuck. "Sadie!" Now I could smell something else that I remembered well from Christie's binges, the sharp aroma of vomit. I ran down the short hall on the other side of the living room. There were 2 doors facing each other, one giving on her bedroom and the other leading to an office study. The doors were shut, but the bathroom door at the end of the hall was open. The harsh fluorescent light showed vomit splattered on the ring of the toilet bowl. There was more on the pink tile floor and the rim of the bathtub. There was a bottle of pills standing beside the soap dish on the sink. The cap was off. I ran to the bedroom. She was lying crosswise on the mussed coverlet, wearing a slip and one suede moccasin. The other had dropped off onto the floor. Her skin was the color of old candle wax, and she did not appear to be breathing. Then she took a huge snoring gasp and wheezed it back out. Her chest remained flat for a terrifying 4 seconds, then she jerked in another rattle of breath. There was another overflowing ashtray on the night table. A crumpled Winston pack, charred at one end by an imperfectly stubbed-out cigarette, lay on top of the dead soldiers. Beside the ashtray were a half-empty glass and a bottle of Glenlivet. Not much of the scotch was gone, thank God for small favors, but it wasn't really the scotch I was worried about, it was the pills. There was also a brown manila envelope on the table with what looked like photographs spilling out of it, but I didn't glance at them, not then. I got my arms around her and tried to pull her into a sitting position. The slip was silk and slithered through my hands. She thumped back onto the bed and took another of those rasping, labored breaths. Her hair flopped across one closed eye. "Sadie, wake up!" Nothing. I grabbed her by the shoulders and hauled her against the head of the bed. It thumped and shivered. "Leave me alone." Slurry and weak, but better than nothing. "Wake up! Sadie, you have to wake up!" I began to slap lightly at her cheeks. Her eyes remained shut, but her hands came up and tried weakly to fend me off. "Wake up! Wake up, damn it!" Her eyes opened, looked at me without recognition, then shut again, but she was breathing more normally. Now that she was sitting, that terrifying rasp was gone. I went back to the bathroom, dumped her toothbrush out of the pink plastic glass, and turned on the cold tap. While I filled the glass, I looked at the label on the pill bottle, Nembutol. There were 10 or a dozen capsules left, so it hadn't been a suicide attempt, at least not an overt one. I spilled them into the toilet, then ran back to the bedroom. She was sliding down from the sitting position I'd left her in, and with her head cocked forward and her chin down against her breastbone, her respiration had turned raspy again. I put the glass of water on the nightstand and froze for a second as I got a look at one of the photographs sticking out of the envelope. It could have been a woman. What remained of the hair was long, but it was hard to tell for sure. Where the face should have been, there was only raw meat, with a hole near the bottom. The hole appeared to be screaming. I hauled Sadie up, grabbed a handful of her hair, and pulled her head back. She moaned something that might have been, "Oh, that hurts." Then I threw the glass of water in her face. She jerked, and her eyes flew open. "George, what are you doing here? George, why am I wet?" "Wake up! Wake up, Sadie!" I began to slap her face again, but more gently now, almost patting. It wasn't good enough. Her eyes started to slip closed. "Go away." "Not unless you want me to call an ambulance. That way you can see your name in the paper. The school board would love that." "Upsy-daisy!" I managed to get my hands linked behind her and pulled her off the bed. Her slip rucked up, then fell back into place as she crumpled to her knees on the carpet. Her eyes flew open and she cried out in pain, but I got her on her feet. She swayed back and forth, slapping at my face with more strength. "Get out! Get out, George!" "No, ma'am." I put my arm around her waist and got her moving toward the door, half leading and half carrying her. We made the turn toward the bathroom, and then her knees came unhinged. I carried her, which was no mean feat, given her height and size. Thank God for adrenaline. I batted down the toilet ring and got her seated just before my own knees gave out. I was gasping for breath, partly from effort, mostly from fright. She started to tilt toward starboard, and I slapped her bare arm. Smack! "Sit up!" I shouted into her face. "Sit up! Christy, God damn it!" Her eyes fought open. They were badly bloodshot. "Who, Christy?" "Lead singer with the Rolling fucking Stones," I said. "How long have you been taking Nembutol? And how many did you take tonight?" "Got a scription," she said. "None of your business, George." "How many? How much did you drink?" Go away." I spun the tub's cold tap all the way, then pulled the pin that turned on the shower. She saw what I meant to do and once again began to slap. "No, no!" I ignored her. This wasn't the first time that I'd put a partially dressed woman into a cold shower. And some things are like riding a bike. I lifted her over the rim of the tub in a quick clean and jerk I'd feel in the small of my back the next day, then held on tight as the cold water smacked her and she began to flail. She reached out to grab the towel bar, yelling. Her eyes were open now. Beads of water stood in her hair. The slip turned transparent. And even under such circumstances, it was impossible not to feel a moment of lust as those curves came into full view. She tried to get out. I pushed her back. "Stand there, Sadie. Stand there and take it." How long? It's cold." "Until I see some color come back into your cheeks." "Why are you doing this?" Her teeth were chattering. "Because you almost killed yourself," I shouted. She flinched. Her feet slipped, but she grabbed the towel bar and stayed upright, reflexes returning good. "The pills weren't working, so I had a drink, that's all. Let me get out. I'm so cold. Please, George, please let me get out." Her hair was clinging to her cheeks now. She looked like a drowned rat, but she was getting some color in her face. Nothing but a thin flush, but it was a start. I turned off the shower, got my arms around her in a hug, and held her as she tottered over the lip of the tub. Water from her soaked slip pattered onto the pink bath mat. I whispered into her ear, "I thought you were dead. When I came in and saw you lying there, I thought you were fucking dead. You will never know how that felt." I let her go. She stared at me with wide, wondering eyes. Then she said, "John was right. Roger, too. He called me tonight before Kennedy's speech from Washington. So what does it matter? By this time next week we'll all be dead, or wish we were." At first I had no idea what she was talking about. I saw Christy standing there, dripping and bedraggled and full of bullshit. And I was utterly furious. "You cowardly bitch," I thought. She must have seen it in my eyes because she drew back. That cleared my head. Could I call her cowardly just because I happened to know what the landscape looked like over the horizon? I took a bath towel from the rack over the toilet and handed it to her. "Strip off, then dry off," I said. "Go out, then. Give me some privacy." "I will if you tell me you're awake." "I'm awake." She looked at me with churlish resentment and, maybe, the tiniest glint of humor. "You certainly know how to make an entrance, George." I turned to the medicine cabinet. "There aren't any more," she said. "What isn't in me is in the commode." Having been married to Christy for 4 years, I looked anyway. Then I flushed the toilet. With that business taken care of, I slipped past her to the bathroom door. "I'll give you 3 minutes," I said. The return address on the manila envelope was John Clayton, 79 East Oglethorpe Avenue, Savannah, Georgia. You certainly couldn't accuse the bastard of flying under false colors or going the anonymous route. The postmark was August 28th, so it had probably been waiting for her when she got back from Reno. She'd had nearly 2 months to brood over the contents. Had she sounded sad and depressed when I'd talked to her on the night of September 6th? Well, no wonder, given the photographs her ex had so thoughtfully sent her. "We're all in danger," she'd said the last time I spoke to her on the phone. "Johnny's right about that." The pictures were of Japanese men, women, and children, victims of the atomic bomb blasts at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or both. Some were blind. Many were bald. Most were suffering from radiation burns. A few, like the faceless woman, had been charbroiled. One picture showed a quartet of black statues in cringing postures. 4 people had been standing in front of a wall when the bomb went off. The people had been vaporized, and most of the wall had been vaporized too. The only parts that remained were the parts that had been shielded by those standing in front of it. The shapes were black because they were coated in charred flesh. On the back of each picture, he had written the same message in his clear, neat hand. Coming soon to America, statistical analysis does not lie. Nice, aren't they? Her voice was flat and lifeless. She was standing in the doorway, bundled into the towel. Her hair fell to her bare shoulders in damp ringlets. How much did you have to drink, Sadie? Only a couple of shots when the pills wouldn't work. I think I tried to tell you that when you were shaking and slapping me. If you expect me to apologize, you'll wait a long time. Barbiturates and booze are a bad combination. It doesn't matter, she said. I've been slapped before. That made me think of Marina, and I winced. It wasn't the same, but slapping is slapping, and I had been angry as well as scared. She went to the chair in the corner, sat down, and pulled the towel tighter around her. She looked like a sulky child. My friend Roger Beaton called. Did I tell you that? Yes. My good friend, Roger. Her eyes dared me to make something of it. I didn't. Ultimately, it was her life. I just wanted to make sure she had a life. All right, your good friend Roger. He told me to be sure and watch the Irish asshole's speech tonight. That's what he called him. Then he asked me how far Jody was from Dallas. When I told him, he said that should be far enough, depending on which way the wind's blowing. He's getting out of Washington himself. Lots of people are. But I don't think it'll do him any good. You can't outrun a nuclear war. She began to cry then, harsh and wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Those idiots are going to destroy a beautiful world. They're going to kill children. I hate them. I hate them all. Kennedy, Khrushchev, Castro. I hope they all rot in hell. She covered her face with her hands. I knelt like some old-fashioned gentleman preparing to propose and embraced her. She put her arms around my neck and clung to me in what was almost a drowner's grip. Her body was still cold from the shower, but the cheek she laid against my arm was feverish. In that moment, I hated them all too. John Clayton most of all, for planting this seed in a young woman who was insecure and psychologically vulnerable. He had planted it, watered it, weeded it, and watched it grow. And was Sadie the only one in terror tonight? The only one who had turned to the pills and the booze? How hard and fast were they drinking in the Ivy Room right now? I'd made the stupid assumption that people were going to approach the Cuban Missile Crisis much like any other temporary international dust-up because by the time I went to college, it was just another intersection of names and dates to memorize for the next prelim. That's how things look from the future. To people in the valley, the dark valley of the present, they look different. The pictures were here when I got back from Reno. She looked at me with her bloodshot, haunted eyes. I wanted to throw them away, but I couldn't. I kept looking at them. That's what the bastard wanted. That's why he sent them. She didn't seem to hear. Statistical analysis is his hobby. He says that someday when the computers are good enough, it'll be the most important science, because statistical analysis is never wrong. Not true. In my mind's eye, I saw George de Mohrenschildt, the charmer who was Lee's only friend. There's always a window of uncertainty. I guess the day of Johnny's supercomputers will never come, she said. The people left, if there are any, will be living in caves, and the sky? No more blue. Nuclear darkness. That's what Johnny calls it. He's full of shit, Sadie. Your pal Roger, too. She shook her head. Her bloodshot eyes regarded me sadly. Johnny knew the Russians were going to launch a space satellite. We were just out of college then. He told me in the summer, and sure enough, they put Sputnik up in October. Next, they'll send a dog or a monkey, Johnny said. After that, they'll send a man. Then they'll send 2 men and a bomb. And did they do that? Did they, Sadie? They sent the dog, and they sent the man. The dog's name was Leica, remember? It died up there, poor doggy. They won't have to send up the 2 men and the bomb, will they? They'll use their missiles, and we'll use ours, all over a shit-pot island where they make cigars. Do you know what the magicians say? What are you talking about? They say you can fool a scientist, but you can never fool another magician. Your ex may teach science, but he's sure no magician. The Russians, on the other hand, are. You're not making sense. Johnny says the Russians have to fight, and soon, because now they have missile superiority. But they won't for long. That's why they won't back down in Cuba. It's a pretext. Johnny's seen too much newsreel footage of missiles being trundled through Red Square on May Day. What he doesn't know, and what Senator Kuchel doesn't know either probably, is that over half of those missiles don't have engines in them. You don't. You can't. He doesn't know how many of their ICBMs blow up on their launch pads in Siberia because their rocketry guys are incompetent. He doesn't know that over half the missiles our U-2 planes have photographed are actually painted trees with cardboard fins. It's sleight of hand, Sadie. It fools scientists like Johnny and politicians like Senator Kuchel, but it would never fool another magician. It's not... She fell silent for a moment, biting at her lips. Then she said, "How could you know stuff like that?" "I can't tell you." "Then I can't believe you." Johnny said Kennedy was going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party, even though everybody else thought it was going to be Humphrey on account of Kennedy being a Catholic. He analyzed the states with primaries, ran the numbers, and he was right. He said Johnson would be Kennedy's running mate because Johnson was the only Southerner who'd be acceptable north of the Mason-Dixon line. He was right about that, too. Kennedy got in, and now he's going to kill us all. Statistical analysis doesn't lie. I took a deep breath. "Sadie, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Are you awake enough to do that?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then I felt her nod against my upper arm. It's now early Tuesday morning. This standoff is going to go on for another 3 days, or maybe it's 4. I can't remember. What do you mean you can't remember? I mean there's nothing about this in Al's notes, and my only college class in American history was almost 20 years ago. It's amazing I can remember as much as I do. We're going to blockade Cuba, but the only Russian ship we'll stop won't have anything in it but food and trade goods. The Russians are going to bluster, but by Thursday or Friday, they're going to be scared to death and looking for a way out. One of the big Russian diplomats will initiate a back-channel meeting with some TV guy. And seemingly from nowhere, the way crossword puzzle answers sometimes come to me, I remembered the name, or almost remembered it. His name is John Scolari, something like that. Scully? Are you talking about John Scully on the ABC News? Yeah, that's him. This is going to happen Friday or Saturday, while the rest of the world, including your ex and your pal from Yale, is just waiting for the word to stick their heads between their legs and kiss their asses goodbye. She heartened me by giggling. This Russian will more or less say, here I did a pretty good Russian accent. I'd learned it listening to Lee's wife, also from Boris and Natasha on Rocky and Bullwinkle. Get word to your president that we want way to back out of this with honor. You agree, take your nuclear missiles out of Turkey. You promised never to invade Cuba. We say okay and dismantle missiles in Cuba. And that, Sadie, is exactly what's going to happen. She wasn't giggling now. She was staring at me with huge saucer eyes. You're making this up to make me feel better." I said nothing. "You're not," she whispered. "You really believe it?" "Wrong," I said. "I know it." Big difference. "George, nobody knows the future." "John Clayton claims to know, and you believe him. Roger from Yale claims to know, and you believe him too. You're jealous of him, aren't you?" "You're goddamn right." "I never slept with him. I never even wanted to." Solemnly she added, "I could never sleep with a man who wears that much cologne." Good to know. I'm still jealous. "Should I ask questions about how you—" "No, I won't answer them." I probably shouldn't have told her as much as I had, but I couldn't stop myself, and in truth, I would do it again. But I will tell you one other thing, and this you can check yourself in a couple of days. Adlai Stevenson and the Russian representative to the UN are going to face off in the General Assembly. Stevenson's going to exhibit huge photos of the missile bases the Russians are building in Cuba and ask the Russian guy to explain what the Russians said wasn't there. The Russian guy is going to say something like, "You must wait, I cannot respond without full translation." And Stevenson, who knows the guy can speak perfect English, is going to say something that'll wind up in the history books along with "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." He's going to tell the Russian guy he can wait until hell freezes over. She looked at me doubtfully, turned to the night table, saw the charred pack of Winstons sitting on top of a hill of crushed butts, and said, "I think I'm out of cigarettes." "You should be okay until morning," I said dryly. "It looks to me like you've front-loaded about a week's supply." "George," her voice was very small, very timid, "will you stay with me tonight? My car's parked in your— If one of the neighborhood neb-noses says something, I'll tell them you came to see me after the president's speech and it wouldn't start." Considering how the Sunliner was running these days, that was plausible. "Does your sudden concern for propriety mean you've stopped worrying about nuclear Armageddon?" "I don't know. I only know I don't want to be alone. I'll even make love with you if that'll get you to stay, but I don't think it would be much good for either of us. My head aches so badly." "You don't have to make love to me, hon. It's not a business deal. I didn't mean—" "Hush. I'll get the aspirin. And look on top of the medicine cabinet, would you? Sometimes I leave a pack of cigarettes there." She had. But by the time she'd taken 3 puffs of the one I lit for her, she was wall-eyed and dozing. I took it from between her fingers and mashed it out on the lower slope of Mount Cancer. Then I took her in my arms and laid back on the pillows. We fell asleep that way. When I woke to the first long light of dawn, the fly of my slacks was unzipped, and a skillful hand was exploring inside my underwear. I turned to her. She was looking at me calmly. "The world is still here, George, and so are we. Come on, but be gentle. My head still aches." I was gentle, and I made it last. We made it last. At the end, she lifted her hips and dug into my shoulder blades. It was her "Oh, dear, oh, my God, oh, sugar" grip. "Anything," she was whispering, her breath in my ear making me shiver as I came. "You can be anything, do anything. Just say you'll stay and that you still love me." Sadie, I never stopped. We had breakfast in her kitchen before I went back to Dallas. I told her it really was Dallas now, and although I didn't have a phone yet, I would give her the number as soon as I had one. She nodded and picked at her eggs. "I meant what I said. I won't ask any more questions about your business." "That's best. Don't ask, don't tell." "Huh? Never mind. Just tell me again that you're up to good rather than no good." "Yes," I said, "I'm one of the good guys." "Will you be able to tell me someday?" I hope so, I said. Sadie, those pictures he sent, I tore them up this morning. I don't want to talk about them. We don't have to. But I need you to tell me that's all the contact you've had with him. That he hasn't been around. He hasn't been, and the postmark on the envelope was Savannah. I'd noticed that, but I'd also noticed the postmark was almost 2 months old. He's not big on personal confrontation. He's brave enough in his mind, but I think he's a physical coward. That struck me as a good assessment. Sending the pictures was textbook passive-aggressive behavior. Still, she'd been sure Clayton wouldn't find out where she was now living and teaching, and she'd been wrong about that. The behavior of mentally unstable people is hard to predict, honey. If you saw him, you'd call the police, right? Yes, George, with a touch of her old impatience. I need to ask you one question. Then we won't talk about this anymore until you're ready, if you ever are. Okay. I tried to prepare an answer to the question I was sure would be coming. Are you from the future, George? It's going to sound crazy. It's been a crazy night. Go ahead. Are you... She laughed, then started to gather the plates. She went to the sink with them, and with her back turned, she asked, Are you human? Like from planet Earth? I went to her, reached around to cup her breasts, and kissed the back of her neck. Totally human. She turned. Her eyes were grave. Can I ask another? I sighed. Shoot. I've got at least 40 minutes before I have to dress for school. Do you happen to have another condom? I think I've discovered the cure for headaches.